Why did you leave? There's a question that lingers long after the door closes, long after footsteps fade and silence takes their place. Why did you leave? Most people never get an answer that feels complete. The moment is always less dramatic than you expect. No grand speeches, no perfect clarity. Sometimes there isn't even a real goodbye. Maybe it was a quiet drifting, not a storm. Maybe you both pretended it was normal until it became the only truth you allowed in the room. You replay the last moments, searching for clues. Was it a single fight, a slow decay, a series of small betrayals or disappointments that finally stacked up tall enough to climb over? There's rarely a single cause, but your mind hunts for one anyway, something to pin the loss on, a point on the timeline you can circle and label, "This is when everything changed." In the absence of answers, your mind fills in the gaps. Maybe you were too much or not enough. Maybe they were running from something that had nothing to do with you. Maybe they reminded them of a version of themselves they wanted to leave behind. Every theory feels plausible in the dead of night, and none are comforting. People like to say, "It's not your fault," but sometimes you wonder if that's just what you tell children so they don't break. Adults rarely get that mercy. The mind loops back, quietly, relentlessly. Why did you leave? What did you see in me, or not see, that made staying impossible? Maybe they left to save themselves. Maybe you were both drowning, and they decided to swim for shore alone. It's possible to love someone and still choose distance. It's possible to care and still vanish. These contradictions don't resolve with time. They just become part of your story, another invisible scar. The hardest part is the lack of a clean ending. When someone leaves without explanation, they take more than their presence. They take the map too, the sense of how the story was supposed to go. You are left walking circles in your own mind, rehearsing conversations you'll never have, arguments you'll never win, apologies that won't land anywhere. Most of the time, the answer to "why did you leave" is quieter than you think. Sometimes there isn't a clear reason. Sometimes people leave because they're lost, not because you failed them. Sometimes they don't even know themselves. The question doesn't demand a dramatic answer, it only needs a space to echo in. The silence left behind becomes its own reply. So you learn to live with it. You learn that closure is a myth, that some doors stay ajar forever. You get used to the weight of the question, the way it bends your memories, the way it sharpens the edges of old photos and familiar places. In time, you stop expecting an answer. The question remains, but it loses its power to haunt. You walk forward, still carrying it, a little lighter each year, until it becomes just another part of the background noise, a story you tell yourself in quieter moments, a conversation you never had.
Did I matter to you? It's a simple question, but it moves quietly beneath the surface of so many relationships, friendships, family, lovers, colleagues. Did I matter to you? Most of the time, you never say it out loud. The world teaches you to keep that sort of need tucked away, folded into small talk, hidden behind casual laughter or polite distance. You notice the absence more than the presence, the unanswered texts, the birthday forgotten, the glance that slides past you in a crowded room. You remember the little things you did to try and matter, the favors, the patience, the unasked for support. You catalogue every moment you offered yourself, hoping for a sign that you were seen, recognized, valued. Sometimes you get it. A look, a word, a thank you whispered late. But most often, you're left with a quiet uncertainty. Were you just another person passing through their story, or were you someone who left a mark? The question doesn't come from vanity. It comes from the human urge to be witnessed, to know that your presence shifted something, even a little. You wonder about the after-image you leave behind. Are you a name they remember, a story they tell, or just a faint outline erased by time? You replay conversations, searching for clues. Did their smile mean they were glad you were there, or was it just politeness? When they called late at night, was it need or habit? Did your leaving make a dent, or did the world close in over your absence like water over a stone? Sometimes you get an answer late, years later in an unexpected message or a chance meeting that cracks the surface of the past. They say, "I never told you, but you helped me through something I couldn't explain." Or, "I always thought about what you said that night." These moments are rare, and they rarely arrive when you need them most. Most of the time, the truth is ambiguous. You mattered, but maybe not in the way you hoped. Maybe you were important in passing, a piece of someone else's journey, even if you never saw the full impact. You learn that mattering isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's invisible, unspoken, woven into the background of someone's life. You want certainty, but life rarely gives it. You carry the question with you, sometimes heavy, sometimes almost weightless. In the quiet moments, it rises again. Did I matter to you? The world keeps moving, people come and go, memories fade, but the desire to matter lingers. A conversation that waits, quietly, for an answer that may never arrive. Were you ever proud of me? Some questions are asked in silence, never voiced but always present. Were you ever proud of me? It's the kind of question that shapes the way you move through the world. For some, it's about parents, for others, a mentor, a friend, a partner. You look for signs, approval in their eyes, a softening in their voice, a moment when you were seen as enough. You remember achievements that felt big to you, grades, awards, first jobs, even small acts of kindness. You waited for the words or the look or the gesture that told you, "I see you, and I'm proud." Sometimes it came. More often, it didn't. Sometimes the silence felt louder than any criticism. People rarely know how much you need to hear it. Maybe they thought you already knew. Maybe they never learned to say it. Maybe they were proud in their own way, but pride got tangled up with their expectations or fears. Sometimes their pride was hidden behind advice or criticism meant to push you further, as if love was only real when it was tough. You start to measure yourself through their imagined eyes. Was that good enough? Did I make you proud or just meet the minimum? The question starts to warp your memories. The moments that should be clear, graduations, milestones, even quiet victories, are replayed for evidence you might have missed. Sometimes you get your answer late, when it's too late to matter. A letter found after they're gone, a story told by someone else, a memory shared years after the fact. He always bragged about you, or she kept that drawing in her desk all these years. The pride was there, but not where you could see it. Most of the time, though, you learn to live without the answer. You realize pride is complicated. Maybe they didn't know how to show it. Maybe you were chasing something they couldn't give. Maybe, in their own flawed way, they were proud, but never learned how to say it out loud. In the end, the question doesn't vanish. It just settles deeper. Were you ever proud of me? You start to answer it for yourself, building a kind of quiet resilience. You begin to see the moments you're proud of, whether anyone else noticed or not. The longing for their pride never quite leaves, but you learn to carry it differently. A private conversation, unfinished, but no longer empty.
Did you love me, or just need me? Some questions come quietly, but never truly leave. Did you love me, or just need me? It's the kind of doubt that doesn't shout, but settles in the bones, surfacing in the quieter hours, long after you stopped saying the word love out loud. For a long time, you may have believed there wasn't a difference, that to be needed by someone was the same as being loved by them. When you're younger or lonely, the lines blur.
You want to believe that being irreplaceable in someone's life is the same as being cherished for who you are. But over time, you start to notice the cracks. Need is urgent, anxious, hungry. It demands your presence, your comfort, your reassurance. It's there in every late-night phone call, in the way their moods became your weather, in how peace between you felt like a job to be done, not a feeling to be shared. Sometimes their need felt like gravity, holding you in place, making it hard to tell where you ended and they began. Love, you begin to realize, is something else. It's quieter, less desperate, less about filling a void, and more about noticing you, separate from them, and being glad you exist anyway. Love pays attention without always asking for more. It notices your flaws and forgives them, not because it can't see them, but because it chooses to stay. Need is afraid of being alone. Love is not threatened by your independence. Need feels like panic when you pull away. Love waits and watches and trusts. You look back at the old moments, the arguments, the silences, the sudden panic in their eyes when you talked about changing or leaving or even just growing. The way they said, "I love you," often sounded more like, "Don't leave me." You think about all the ways you became essential, but not always wanted. How sometimes you felt like a bandage, a lifeline, a solution to a problem you never made. There's a kind of sadness that comes with realizing you were needed more than you were loved. You remember the gifts you gave that were never noticed, the questions you asked that were never answered, the laughter that sometimes sounded forced. You wonder if they ever really saw you, or just the safety you provided. Did they love your company, or just the quiet it brought to their own storms? Some people never learn the difference. For them, love and need are intertwined, one feeding the other, impossible to untangle. Maybe you were one of them once. Maybe you wanted to be needed so badly that you mistook it for love, clung to it, made yourself smaller to fit the shape of their longing. When you're needed, you have a role, a reason. When you're loved, you have a place, a belonging. You want to ask them years later, with the distance of time and the quiet of changed lives, "Did you love me or just need me?" But most of the time, you never get that conversation. Most of the time, you're left to piece together the answer from memory, intuition, and the quiet ache that never really leaves. In the end, you learn that love is not the same as need, that to be needed is a kind of gravity, but to be loved is to be seen. And sometimes you were both, needed and loved in ways neither of you could say out loud. You walk away with a deeper question for yourself. Will I let myself be needed again, or will I wait for love next time? The answer, when it comes, is never as clear as you want, but you carry the question with you, a silent guard against losing yourself again.
Was I enough? You can go your whole life trying to answer this question, even if you never say it out loud. Was I enough? It comes up quietly, especially in the aftermath, after relationships, after jobs, after chapters of your life close, and you're left with only memories and the echo of your own effort. It's an old ache that travels with you, sometimes invisible, sometimes overwhelming. You measure your worth by the reactions of others, the successes you stack up, the failures that haunt you late at night. You remember trying, sometimes so hard it hurt, trying to please, to impress, to keep peace, to hold together something that was always meant to fall apart. You replay old conversations, analyzing every word, every look, trying to find a moment when you were exactly what they needed, what they wanted. Sometimes you were told you were too much, too loud, too sensitive, too ambitious. Other times you felt like a ghost, fading in rooms where no one looked up when you entered. Too much or not enough. Rarely, if ever, just right. You wonder if anyone ever really feels enough.
The world sets the bar just out of reach, moving it as soon as you get close. Parents want one thing, partners another, friends pull you in every direction. You become a master of adaptation, shaping yourself to fit, to belong, to be worthy. It works, sometimes, but there's always a price. The slow erosion of your real self, traded piece by piece for approval. The question comes back in the quiet moments. You look at photos from years ago, smiling, performing, trying. You remember the energy it took to keep everyone happy. You remember the exhaustion of hiding the parts of yourself you thought were unacceptable. The shame that came when you failed to meet expectations, even if those expectations were never clear. Was I enough? Or was I just a version of myself shaped by what I thought others wanted? There are moments when you almost feel at peace. A compliment given freely, a moment of genuine connection, an achievement that means something to you, even if no one else notices. But those moments pass quickly, often chased away by the old doubts. You start to realize that the people who made you feel not enough were often struggling with their own sense of lack. Sometimes no one is ever enough for them, not you, not anyone. You want someone to say it plainly, without condition, you were enough. But even if they did, would you believe them? The need for validation runs deep, and sometimes you're your own harshest critic. The question is less about others and more about your relationship with yourself. Can you accept the parts of yourself that don't fit, the messiness, the contradictions, the failures? Can you believe that enough isn't perfection, but presence? Showing up, trying, being there, even when it's hard. With time, you start to answer yourself, quietly. You begin to let go of the old standards, the comparisons, the race you never signed up for. You see that enough is not a destination, but a decision. A line you draw in the sand and stand behind, even if no one else joins you. The question doesn't disappear, but it loses its bite. You learn to measure your worth by your own standards, not the shifting shadows of other people's needs. And slowly, you find a kind of freedom in being simply, imperfectly enough.
Why didn't you fight for me? There's a special kind of hurt that comes from not being chosen, not just left behind, but left unclaimed, undefended. Why didn't you fight for me? It's a question that rarely gets a real answer, but it echoes in the places where trust once lived. You expect, somewhere deep down, that love means effort, that care means struggle, that if you matter, someone will fight for you when things get hard. So when they don't, the silence feels like an accusation. Maybe you weren't worth the effort. Maybe they just couldn't or wouldn't or didn't know how. You remember the moment you realized the fight wasn't coming. Maybe it was a conversation that turned cold, a promise that never got repeated, a slow fading of energy and attention. You waited for a grand gesture, a plea, a willingness to work things out. You waited for anger or tears or a refusal to let go. Instead, you got resignation, acceptance, the sound of someone packing up their investment in you and moving it elsewhere. It felt like a verdict, not enough to stay for, not worth the trouble. You play the old scenes in your head, searching for evidence. Was there something you missed? Were you asking too much, expecting more than they could give? Sometimes the answer is yes, but more often, you were just asking for a sign that you mattered enough to warrant the effort. You wanted proof that you were worth more than the easiest way out. There are 1,000 reasons people don't fight. Sometimes they're tired, worn down by life, by other battles, by their own failures. Sometimes they're afraid. Sometimes they don't know how to fight for anyone, not even themselves. For some, the idea of conflict is unbearable. For others, the prospect of losing is worse than the pain of letting go quietly. Sometimes they convince themselves that leaving is an act of mercy. For them, for you. Sometimes they simply don't care enough to try. None of these reasons feel good. None of them fill the hole that gets left behind. You're left to carry the burden of the question, and it shapes your sense of self. If you were worth fighting for, someone would have fought. If they didn't, maybe you weren't. The logic is faulty, but the feeling is real. Over time, you learn that other people's willingness to fight is a reflection of them, not you. Some people never learned how. Some were never thought for themselves. Some just don't have it in them to push back against the current, even for something precious. The tragedy is you can't teach someone to want what they don't want, or to fight for what they don't believe they can keep. You stop expecting a rescue. You learn to fight for yourself, or not at all. You understand slowly that the question isn't, why didn't you fight for me? But why did I need you to? The answer is complicated, rooted in loneliness, hope, the belief that love means mutual effort. You grieve the fight that never came, and then you move forward, a little stronger, a little less willing to wait for someone else to prove your worth. You fight, this time, for your own peace.
What did I do wrong? Some questions turn into rituals, the way you examine a wound, pressing at the edges to see if it still hurts. What did I do wrong? This is the loop that starts when things end unexpectedly or slowly unravel in silence. You replay conversations, analyze your choices, dig through memories for a single moment, a careless word, a forgotten promise, something you should have noticed or fixed before it was too late. You want a cause, something simple and concrete. You want to believe that pain follows logic, that loss can be traced to a fault, preferably one you can control or correct. The mind is relentless in its search for error. You wonder if you were too blunt, too passive, too much or too little. Maybe you expected too much or not enough. Maybe your patience became neglect. Maybe your honesty sounded like criticism or your silence felt like indifference. You recall every small argument, every uncomfortable silence, every misread signal, as if the answer might be hiding there, just out of sight. There's a strange comfort in blame. If you did something wrong, then the world makes sense. You were the architect of your own heartbreak. If you can find the mistake, you can promise not to repeat it, rewrite the script, avoid the pain next time. You imagine conversations where you apologize, confess, make it right. But real life rarely grants such clarity. More often, you're left with fragments, hints, unresolved tension. The other person moves on, silent or vague, leaving you alone with the puzzle. Sometimes the truth is, you didn't do anything catastrophically wrong. Sometimes things break for reasons beyond your reach. Timing, circumstances, the slow erosion of interest or trust. People grow apart without anyone meaning to. Life interferes, priorities shift. Other times, both of you make mistakes and neither wants to admit it. Responsibility gets lost in the noise of living. The world isn't fair with its answers. You might never know what, if anything, you did wrong. The question settles into your daily routine, influencing the way you show up in future relationships. You become more careful, more guarded, or maybe more desperate to please. You start to expect that every connection is a test, every conversation a chance to fail. Self-doubt becomes a habit disguised as self-improvement. The risk is that you internalize blame for things that were never in your control. You become convinced that love is fragile because you are flawed, that if you just work harder, do better, you'll be safe next time. But sometimes there is no safety, no perfect answer, no fix. Sometimes you did your best and it still wasn't enough to keep things whole. In the end, you learn to live with the question. You stop interrogating the past for a single cause. You accept that sometimes what went wrong is everything and nothing at once. A mosaic of small failures, misunderstandings, or just the randomness of being human. The question loses its sharpness, becomes background noise. You learn to forgive yourself, to move forward without perfect closure. You accept that not every answer is knowable, and sometimes not knowing is its own kind of peace.
Do you regret it? Regret is a shadow that moves differently for everyone. For some, it's heavy and obvious. For others, it's barely there, a faint outline that only appears in certain lights. Do you regret it? The question is less about the past and more about the hunger for validation, a hope that your pain mattered enough to linger in someone else's memory. You want to believe that choices have consequences, that the ending changed them too, not just you. You may never ask the question directly, but it surfaces in the way you study old photos, reread old messages, replay last words. Did it cost them anything to walk away? Was your absence just an empty space, or a wound they carried? You want to hear them say they wish things had gone differently, that it hurt, that you were not so easily replaced. Regret is complicated. People rarely admit it outright. They may claim they don't look back, that they made the best choice, that life moved forward as it should. Sometimes this is bravado, a way to save face. Sometimes it's the truth. They really don't regret it, and that's a different kind of pain. More often, though, the truth is private. Regret is something people confess only to themselves, if at all. You think about your own regrets, the things you said or didn't say, the ways you might have tried harder or let go sooner. You wonder if you would do it all over again, knowing how it ended. Regret is a quiet teacher. It shapes you, sometimes gently, sometimes with a sharp edge. It can paralyze or propel. It can keep you trapped in the past or push you towards something new. In moments of honesty, you know they probably have regrets too. No ending is perfect. No relationship without its unfinished business. Maybe they regret the way they left or how long they stayed. Maybe they regret not fighting harder or not letting go sooner. Maybe their regret is so subtle they barely recognize it. Just a moment of discomfort when your name comes up, or a memory that arrives uninvited when they least expect it. But regret doesn't always mean they want to return, or that things would be different if given another chance. It's just an echo, a reminder of what could have been. You learn that regret isn't an answer, just another layer in the story. You can't build your sense of worth on whether someone else wishes they'd chosen differently. Eventually, you let the question go, or it lets go of you. You stop seeking proof of regret and start looking for acceptance. You carry your own lessons, your own changes, and accept that sometimes regret is just the background music to the lives we build after endings. The question fades, replaced by a quieter understanding. What's done is done, and you are left with what you choose to do next. What broke us? Every ending has its own weather. Some come suddenly, like a storm. Others are slow, a gradual change in temperature, unnoticed until the cold is everywhere. What broke us? It's a question that doesn't get a straight answer, even when both sides want to understand. There's no single moment to point to, no obvious fault line running through the middle of your shared history. You look back, searching for the crack, the argument that turned the tide, the silence that settled in and wouldn't leave. Sometimes it was obvious, loud, impossible to ignore. More often, it was 1,000 small things accumulating like dust. Disappointments that never got aired out. Hopes that didn't line up. Needs that went unmet. You remember the days when love felt easy, when you thought nothing could touch you. Then, slowly, things began to shift. Words that once felt light grew heavy. Laughter became rare. You stopped reaching for each other, stopped noticing. Maybe it was timing. Maybe you both changed in ways that made you strangers. Maybe it was trust, once broken, never fully rebuilt. Or the slow grind of daily life, the way it wears down even the best intentions. Sometimes old wounds resurface. Jealousy, resentment, fear. You try to talk about it, but the words feel brittle, defensive. Each conversation a negotiation, a truce rather than a solution. There's a temptation to blame, to make one person the villain, the other the victim. But real life resists such easy stories. More often, you both played a part. You both looked away at the wrong time. You both avoided the hard questions, clung to comfort, postponed the truth. You wanted to believe love was enough, that effort could fix anything. But some things can't be fixed, only survived. You find yourself wanting to name it, to say, this is what broke us. But it's rarely that neat. It's a story without a clear climax, a slow fade rather than a final break. Maybe you never learned how to disagree without wounding each other. Maybe you outgrew the version of yourselves that fit together. Maybe, deep down, you stopped believing in a shared future. In the aftermath, you search for meaning. You want to understand so you can avoid it next time. But the truth is, every ending is a tangle of choices, mistakes, circumstances. Sometimes things break not because of a single act, but because two people couldn't find their way back to each other. You carry the question with you, but it softens with time. You accept that some things end without full explanation. You stop needing to know exactly what broke you and start looking at what might heal you. The question remains, but it loses its urgency. You move forward, changed, but still searching for connection, still hoping next time the story will end differently, or not end at all.
Did you ever miss me? It's one of those questions that arrives unexpectedly, late at night, in the middle of an ordinary day, or when you pass a place that used to belong to both of you. Did you ever miss me? The world expects you to move on, to treat absence as a clean break, to believe that once people are gone, the story is over, but the mind lingers in the space left behind. You wonder if they ever felt the same emptiness you did, the sudden absence of familiar rituals, the ghost of your voice in their routine. You imagine the moments after. Did they reach for their phone to send a message, then stop themselves? Did they notice the silence where your laughter used to be? Or did their life fill up so quickly that your absence faded into the background noise of a changing life? Sometimes you want them to admit it hurt. You want proof that you left a mark, that your memory isn't just a burden you carry alone. You try to picture it, the ordinary loneliness after a loss. Maybe they sat with a coffee in the morning and thought of you, just for a second. Maybe they heard your favorite song, felt the twist in their stomach, then shrugged it off and kept going. Missing someone isn't always dramatic. It can be a passing ache, a flash of regret, a longing that disappears as quickly as it comes. Maybe they hid it, out of pride or fear, or just the need to keep moving. You remember the times you missed them, the urge to share something small, the impulse to check in, the empty spot beside you. Sometimes missing someone feels like a question with no answer, a story with no reply. You wish you could ask directly, did you ever feel it too? Or was it easy to forget? You try to find clues. You look for signs. Did they check up on you through friends? Keep your things? Hesitate before letting go of your old photos? Or did they erase every trace, determined to start over without the shadow of your presence? The truth is, most people miss someone at some point. The intensity changes, but the absence lingers, especially in the spaces where connection once lived. Missing someone doesn't always mean they want you back, or that the ending was a mistake. Sometimes it's just a natural consequence of having cared, of having made a life together, even for a little while. You start to accept that missing someone isn't an answer. It's just a fact, a reminder that you existed, that your life was intertwined, that separation is always a kind of grief. You may never get to ask the question. You may never hear the words you want. Yes, I missed you. Sometimes I still do. But you learn to live with the uncertainty. You come to understand that missing and being missed are not symmetrical, not predictable, not controllable. In the end, it's enough to know that you felt something real. Whether or not they missed you, you were alive to the loss, and that's its own kind of answer.
Were you honest? There's a particular ache that comes from not knowing the truth. Were you honest? It's a question that's rarely asked directly, but it hangs in the air long after the story is over. Honesty is supposed to be the foundation, the thing that makes trust possible. But people are complicated, and so are the truths they carry. You look back at the things they said, the promises they made, the details they chose to share, and the ones they held back. Was it all true, or just what you wanted to hear? Sometimes the lie is obvious, exposed by contradiction or time. More often, it's subtle, a gentle rounding of the truth, a silence where there should have been confession. You find yourself wondering, did I ever know the real you, or just the version you thought I needed? You remember the times you wanted to ask but hesitated. Maybe you feared the answer. Maybe you sensed there was something fragile about your happiness and honesty would break it. Sometimes you were complicit, willing to ignore small inconsistencies to protect the comfort of what you had. Other times you fought for the truth, only to be met with defensiveness or vague explanations. Honesty is complicated by fear. People hide things for all kinds of reasons, to protect themselves, to avoid hurting you, to keep the peace. Sometimes they lie because they're ashamed. Sometimes they think the truth would end everything. The problem is, dishonesty doesn't prevent pain. It just delays it, distorts it, turns it into a quiet corrosion that eats at the edges of trust. You start to realize that no one is perfectly honest, not with themselves, not with anyone else. We all curate our stories, omit details, bend the narrative to fit the shape of what we want to believe. But there's a difference between kindness and deception, between privacy and secrecy. You wonder which side they fell on, whether their silences were merciful or cowardly. You want to believe you mattered enough for the truth, that even if it was uncomfortable, you were trusted with it. Maybe you were. Maybe in the end, the lies were small, the omissions forgivable. Or maybe the relationship was built on illusions and honesty was never really possible. The uncertainty lingers, shaping the way you trust in the future. You become more vigilant, more careful with your own truth, more cautious about believing others. In time, the question softens. You accept that you may never know the whole story. You learn to live with a version of the past that's incomplete. The demand for perfect honesty fades, replaced by a quieter hope that next time you'll choose truth even when it's hard, and find someone who does the same. What are you afraid of? There's always something beneath the surface, something rarely spoken. What are you afraid of? It's a question that exposes vulnerability, a door most people keep firmly shut. We live in a world that rewards confidence, certainty, bravado. Fear is supposed to be private, hidden, managed, but fear shapes everything. Choices, relationships, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we could be. You remember moments when their fear peeked through, the hesitation before making a decision, the way their eyes darted away in confrontation,
the stories they avoided telling. Sometimes it was obvious: fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of being truly seen. Other times it was subtle: an unwillingness to take risks, a pattern of keeping things on the surface, a reluctance to dream too big or want too much. You wanted to ask, but maybe you didn't know how. Maybe you sensed the question would unsettle them, or that the answer would be too raw, too much. People protect their fears fiercely. Some cover them with anger, some with humor, some with silence. It's easier to keep things light, to talk about anything but what keeps you up at night. But unspoken fears still drive actions. Maybe they kept you an arm's length because they feared disappointment. Maybe they left because the idea of staying, of being known too deeply, was overwhelming. Maybe they pushed you away not because you failed them, but because they were terrified of needing you. Fear isn't always logical, but it's powerful. You think about your own fears, the ones you rarely share. You wonder what it would mean to name them out loud, to admit that you're afraid of not being enough, of being forgotten, of wasting your one short life. You realize how much connection depends on the willingness to share these secrets, to risk rejection for the sake of being truly seen. Most people never get the conversation. They never ask, "What are you afraid of?" Or they do, and get only part of the answer. The rest remains hidden, wrapped in defense, disguised as strength. But in rare moments, when someone trusts you enough to share their fears, something shifts. The armor falls away. In the end, you understand that everyone is afraid of something, whether they show it or not. Fear is universal, a quiet companion that shapes who we become. You start to look at people differently, with more patience, more gentleness. You realize that to love anyone, including yourself, is to accept the presence of fear and to keep asking softly until someone is ready to answer.
Is this all there is? There comes a moment, sometimes in the middle of a crowd, sometimes alone at night, when you pause and the question arrives, as if from nowhere: is this all there is? It doesn't announce itself loudly. It slips in like fog, soft but unsettling, drifting through the cracks of your everyday routines. Maybe you're standing in the kitchen, or stuck in traffic, or waking up in the same bed you've slept in for years, and you realize you're repeating days that look suspiciously like each other. It's a question that rarely gets voiced out loud. The world has little patience for existential doubt. You're supposed to be grateful, productive, always reaching for the next thing. But beneath the steady hum of expectation, a quiet emptiness can take hold, a sense that life is somehow smaller, flatter, less meaningful than you hoped. You try to fill it: new experiences, new people, new ambitions. For a while, it works. Then the question returns, just as persistent, just as unsatisfied. You wonder if everyone feels this way. Maybe they do, and no one talks about it. Maybe this is the hidden cost of growing up, the gradual shrinking of dreams, the realization that most things you chase don't live up to their promise. Relationships begin, end, or settle into predictable shapes. Careers plateau. Excitement is replaced by routine. You're surrounded by everything you once wanted, and yet there's a thin layer of disappointment that nothing quite fits. Nothing truly completes the picture. Sometimes the question brings guilt. Shouldn't you be happy? Shouldn't you be grateful? You remind yourself of the good things, count your blessings, try to banish the ache. But gratitude isn't always a cure for longing. You find yourself drifting through memories, replaying moments when life felt more vivid, more full.
You wonder if that was real, or just youth's illusion. It's tempting to blame yourself, to imagine that others are more fulfilled, more certain, less haunted by this vague hunger. But the question is ancient, woven into the fabric of being human. Philosophers, poets, ordinary people, they all stumble over it eventually. Is this all there is? Is this what life is supposed to feel like? Maybe there is no final answer. Maybe the purpose isn't to find more, but to learn how to live inside the question, to make peace with the limits, the ordinary, the unfinished. Some people find meaning in small moments, a warm cup of tea, laughter with a friend, the quiet loyalty of a pet. Others search endlessly, hoping the next chapter will finally deliver what's missing. The truth is, the question never really goes away. It sits quietly, shaping the contours of your days, sometimes sharp and unbearable, sometimes fading into the background. Over time, you learn that all there isn't static. It changes with you. What was once empty space can become something more if you let it, or it can stay a quiet ache, a companion on the road. In the end, maybe you stop demanding answers. You keep moving, keep searching, keep creating meaning where you can. And in rare, beautiful moments, you catch yourself feeling, if only for a heartbeat, that maybe, just maybe, this is enough.
Did you ever want to stay? Some questions linger in the silence after endings. Did you ever want to stay? It's a question loaded with hope, disappointment, and the urge to rewrite the past. Sometimes the ending was abrupt, a slammed door, a final message, a sharp goodbye. Other times it was a slow unraveling, so gradual you barely noticed until it was too late. But always the mind circles back, replaying those final days, searching for evidence that leaving wasn't inevitable. You wonder if there was ever a crossroads, a moment when things could have gone differently. Did they hesitate at the threshold, heart caught between longing and escape? Or was leaving a simple decision made long before you saw it coming? You remember the last times you shared space, a lingering look, a small kindness, the way their hand brushed yours as if unsure whether to hold on or let go. You want to believe they considered staying, that the life you built, with all its imperfections, was at least worth a second thought. You hope there were moments when the pull of comfort, history, and shared memory made them pause. Maybe they wanted to stay for the routine, the coffee in the morning, the quiet laughter, the soft light through the windows. Maybe they stayed longer than they should have, hoping things would change. But sometimes the desire to stay isn't enough. Love gets tangled up with fear, regret, the realization that holding on would mean shrinking, pretending, or living with less than either of you deserved. You want to ask, did you stay as long as you could, or did you leave at the first sign of trouble? The answers are rarely clear, even to the person who left. People leave for 1,000 reasons, some obvious, some hidden even to themselves. Sometimes it's about you, sometimes it's about them. Sometimes it's about the shape of two lives that simply stopped fitting together no matter how hard you tried to force them. Wanting to stay and being able to are not always the same thing. You think about your own reluctance to let go, the nights you convinced yourself things would get better, the excuses you made for why leaving felt unthinkable. Maybe they felt the same. Maybe leaving was an act of mercy or an act of survival. Maybe both. You may never get to ask the question, or if you do, the answer will be a careful, edited version of the truth. Of course I wanted to stay, they might say, but words are cheap when weighed against action. The reality is, they left. Whatever desire they felt to stay wasn't strong enough to overcome whatever pulled them away. In time, you learn to live with the uncertainty. You realize the question is less about their choice and more about your need for reassurance, for a narrative that doesn't end with abandonment. You begin to accept that wanting someone to stay isn't the same as being right for each other. And as you move forward, you carry the lesson with you, a reminder that sometimes wanting isn't enough, and that's not always a failure.
Why didn't you call? There's a strange loneliness that comes from waiting for a call, a message, some sign that you still matter. Why didn't you call? It's a question loaded with longing and accusation, wrapped in the hope that maybe there's a good reason, some explanation that will make the silence less painful. You remember the days when you reached out, sent messages into the void, watched the clock, made excuses for their absence. Maybe they were busy, maybe they lost their phone, maybe, always maybe. Each hour of silence stretched longer, turning hope into worry, then into resignation. You rehearsed conversations in your head, imagined what you would say if they finally answered. But most of the time, you got nothing. The phone never rang, the message never came. And as days turned into weeks, you started to question your own worth. Was it something you said, something you did? Or was the connection always more fragile than you realized? You search for clues in the past, old jokes, shared memories, promises made in better times. Did they forget? Or did they remember and choose not to answer? Not calling can be a message in itself, a silent statement that words aren't always necessary, that absence speaks just as loudly as presence. Sometimes people disappear because they don't know what to say. Sometimes they fear confrontation or can't bear the awkwardness of goodbye. Sometimes they think silence is kinder than the truth. You want to ask, was I so easy to forget? Did I mean so little that a call was too much to ask? But most of the time, the answer isn't about you. People get lost in their own lives, overwhelmed by problems they can't share, pulled away by currents you never saw coming. Sometimes, silence is the only language they have left. You remember the times you didn't call too, the friendships you let fade, the family you neglected, the apologies you never made. It's easier to understand from a distance. You realize that reaching out takes courage, and sometimes you just don't have it. Sometimes you let things slip away because holding on feels harder than letting go. The pain of being forgotten can shape you. It can make you hesitant to trust, afraid to hope, reluctant to risk reaching out again. But over time, you learn that silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's just a byproduct of being human, of lives moving at different speeds. You start to accept that not every question gets answered, not every absence gets explained. You learn to pick up the phone for yourself, to reach out even when you're afraid, to offer what you wish you'd been given. The question lingers, but it loses its sharpness. You move forward, changed, but not defined by the calls that never came.
Do you remember me? It's a question that comes quietly, almost shy. A whisper trailing behind you in old places or in chance encounters. A sudden pause when you see someone from your past. Do you remember me? Sometimes you want to ask it out loud. Other times it lingers unsaid, woven through small talk and polite smiles. The longer you live, the more people drift in and out of your story, until you wonder if you've become just another blurred face in someone else's crowd. You replay old moments, the ones that felt important at the time. Late-night talks, laughter that doubled you over, a kindness given or received, the comfort of just being seen. For you, those moments matter. But memory is slippery, shaped by need and time and the chaos of living. What was unforgettable to you might have just been another day to someone else. There are people you never stopped thinking about, even as years went by. Sometimes it's an old friend, a teacher, a first love, someone whose presence changed the shape of your life, even if only for a season. You wonder if you left any mark at all, or if you've been quietly erased by the slow march of new relationships, new routines. You imagine asking, "Do you remember me?" and dread the possibility of a blank stare or a hesitant "remind me?" Or worse, a polite lie, a glimmer of recognition that never reaches the eyes. You want to believe that what you shared was real, that you weren't just passing through, that some part of you remains lodged in their story. Sometimes you get your answer by accident, a message out of the blue, a memory shared, an old joke referenced as if no time had passed. In those moments, you feel both exposed and grateful. Someone remembers you, the real you, not just your name or your face, but the version of yourself you thought might have disappeared. The connection, however brief, is proof that the past wasn't a dream. Other times, the silence is your answer. Life moves on. People forget. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. You can't carry everyone with you. The world demands that you let go, make space for new faces, new stories. Sometimes you do the same without realizing, only to be startled by someone asking if you remember them and feeling guilt for what you've lost. You start to understand that being remembered isn't always the measure of your worth. You live fully, you care deeply, you leave traces whether anyone else can see them or not. Memory is unpredictable, and sometimes the people who remember you most are the ones you least expect. You learn to let go of the need to be unforgettable. You realize that your value isn't tied to how many people remember you, but to how fully you showed up in the moments you shared. You remember yourself, honor your own story, and in doing so, make peace with whatever memories others may hold.
Why did it have to end? There's a restlessness that arrives in the aftermath of endings. Why did it have to end? The question circles endlessly, especially when the ending didn't feel fair or complete. Sometimes it's a friendship that faded, a relationship that broke, a chapter of life that closed before you were ready. The ending may have come suddenly or crept in slowly, too quiet to notice until it was too late. You search for reasons, something to blame, something that makes sense. Was it a mistake, a misunderstanding, a single moment that set off a chain reaction? Was it inevitable, written in the differences that became too big to ignore? Sometimes you want someone to blame, yourself, the other person, the world. Other times you just want a story you can tell yourself, a way to wrap up the pain and put it somewhere safe. You replay conversations, searching for clues. You remember the last look, the words you didn't say, the apology that came too late or not at all. You wonder if things could have been different if you'd fought harder, listened better, forgiven sooner. Regret mixes with relief, anger with longing. Endings rarely offer closure. More often they leave you suspended, holding on to questions that have no clear answers. People say that everything happens for a reason, but you start to see that life is rarely that neat. Sometimes things end because people change, because time runs out,
because the distance between two hearts grows too wide to bridge. Sometimes endings are acts of mercy, making space for growth or sparing you from a slow unraveling. Other times, they are just what happens, random, senseless, no matter how much meaning you try to find in the rubble. You grieve not just the loss, but the future that will never happen, the plans you made, the rituals you built, the version of yourself that existed in that relationship. The question, why did it have to end, becomes a placeholder for all the pain, the confusion, the longing for a world that made more sense. Over time, the question softens. You learn to live with uncertainty, to accept that not every story gets a satisfying conclusion. You begin to see that endings are also beginnings, that life keeps moving even when you feel left behind. You learn to carry the memories gently, to honor what was good without being trapped by what is gone. You make peace, slowly, with the truth that some questions have no answers, and that's part of what it means to be human. You keep going, one day at a time, and trust that someday the ache will be replaced by something quieter, a kind of acceptance or even gratitude for what was.
Who am I to you? It's a question most people never dare to ask directly, but it hovers in every relationship, shaping every interaction. Who am I to you? Not just my name or my role, but the place I hold in your world. Am I important or just convenient? Am I unforgettable or just background noise? The uncertainty can be both thrilling and terrifying. You think about the ways people define each other, labels, titles, histories, shared jokes, inside stories. But underneath, you want to know, am I truly seen? Do I matter in a way that goes beyond habit, obligation, or circumstance? You scan for clues, a certain look, the tone of a message, the way they show up, or don't, when you need them. Sometimes the answer is clear in their actions more than their words. Sometimes the ambiguity is sharper than any rejection. You wonder about your own place in their story. Are you a confidant, a lover, a placeholder until something better comes along? Are you a source of comfort or just a routine? In your quietest moments, you worry that you are more invested than they are, that you see them as central while they see you as peripheral. You remember times you felt truly seen, the rare moments when someone understood you without explanation, when their presence made you feel more real, more yourself. Those moments stay with you, anchors in a world of shifting connections. But just as often, you've been mistaken for someone else's fantasy, or convenience, or temporary solution. Sometimes you want to ask, who am I to you? But you're afraid of the answer. You fear that naming it will break the spell or reveal that you care more than you should. So you wait for evidence, hope for confirmation, settle for the comfort of routines and familiar conversations. You start to realize that relationships are often built on unspoken assumptions. People rarely articulate what others mean to them, perhaps out of fear or habit, or the hope that actions will speak for themselves. But silence can breed doubt, and doubt can hollow out even the best intentions. Eventually, you accept that your place in someone's life isn't always up to you. You can show up, be present, love fully, but the way you're held in someone else's heart is beyond your control. You learn to ask the question gently, to accept the ambiguity, to find your worth in how you see yourself, not just in the reflection of someone else's eyes. And sometimes, against all odds, someone tells you exactly who you are to them. In those moments, you feel the relief and vulnerability of being seen, truly, even if just for a heartbeat. You hold on to those answers and try to offer the same clarity in return.
Was it my fault? This is the kind of question that settles deep, sometimes for years. Was it my fault? The words form slowly in your mind, growing roots the longer you sit with them. Every ending, every failure, every rift that never quite healed seems to circle back to this point. If things had been different, if you had been different, would it have turned out better? Would it have lasted? Would someone have stayed? You replay the story scene by scene. You search for a turning point, a slip, an unforgivable word, or a silent moment where you didn't reach out. You wonder if you missed a warning, ignored a need, or were simply blind to the signs. Memory becomes forensic evidence, every detail examined for proof of your own guilt or innocence. Some days you convince yourself it really was your fault. You catalogue your flaws, amplify your regrets, and let the shame wash over you. Maybe you were careless, distracted, too self-absorbed. Maybe you pushed too hard or didn't fight hard enough. The stories you tell yourself become self-fulfilling. Fault feels comforting in its way, because if you're to blame, you can promise to do better, avoid this pain next time, make yourself into someone deserving of a happier ending. But fault is rarely clear. Relationships are built on two sets of hopes, fears, and old wounds. What feels like your personal failure may be tangled with someone else's inability to speak, to stay, to forgive. Sometimes people leave for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Timing, past hurts, problems you never even knew existed. Sometimes the ending was inevitable, no matter how carefully you tried to avoid it. There's also the possibility that nobody is really at fault. Maybe it was just two lives growing apart, two people evolving in ways that no longer fit. Maybe the world changed and you were swept along with it. There's no one to blame, not really, but the ache for an explanation remains. You think about the other person and what they might say if you asked them. Maybe they'd offer reassurance, it wasn't you. Maybe they'd point out your blind spots, give you truths you can't yet see. Maybe they'd just shrug, unable to make sense of it all either. The reality is, sometimes nobody knows for sure. Over time, you learn to live with the uncertainty. The need to assign fault softens. You start to realize that guilt is only useful if it leads to understanding, not punishment. You accept that you made mistakes, because everyone does. You also recognize that some things are simply out of your hands. The question doesn't always disappear, but it loses its sting. You become gentler with yourself, a little more forgiving. You see that fault is rarely as simple as it feels in the lonely hours. You let yourself off the hook, not because you were perfect, but because you are human. And that, you realize, has to be enough.
Did you ever forgive me? Forgiveness is one of those words that's easy to say, but nearly impossible to measure. Did you ever forgive me? The question lingers in the places where apologies were whispered or left unsaid, in the spaces between people who once cared deeply and then hurt each other anyway. You wonder if the damage you caused was ever truly mended, or if it still pulses beneath the surface like an old bruise. You replay the moment you disappointed them, betrayed a trust, or simply failed to be who they needed. You remember saying sorry, maybe too late, maybe not at all. Sometimes you tried to explain, to fix, to offer something that would make the wound smaller. Other times, you waited in silence, hoping time would do the work for you. You tried to guess how they carried it. Did they talk about you with anger?
Did they let your name pass through their mind like a warning? Or did they release it, let the past fade, and move forward lighter? Forgiveness, after all, is as much a gift to oneself as it is to the person who caused the pain. You hope they found peace, but you're not sure. Sometimes you're not sure if you even deserve it. You think about what forgiveness actually means. Does it erase the past or just allow both people to live alongside it? Does it require forgetting or simply letting go of the need for repayment? You wonder if their life would be different if they had held on to resentment or if they managed to let it dissolve. Sometimes the silence is answer enough. They moved on, started over, or simply stopped mentioning your name. Maybe they forgave you, quietly, with no ceremony. Maybe they didn't, and you remain a cautionary tale, a story told in warning. You realize you have no right to demand their forgiveness, only to hope for it and to try to become someone less likely to harm in the future. You notice the ways you seek forgiveness from yourself too, the guilt that ebbs and flows, the moments when you wonder if you've changed enough to deserve a second chance, even if only in your own mind. You learn that self-forgiveness is a process, not an event, one that requires patience, honesty, and sometimes years of slow healing. Eventually, you realize you may never know if you were forgiven, and that's part of the price of being human. You learn to live with the mystery, and you make your peace with the possibility that forgiveness, if it ever came, wasn't for you at all. You move forward anyway, with more gentleness, more humility, and a quiet hope that someday both of you found a way to let go.
Why didn't you say goodbye? There's a special kind of ache that comes from being left behind without warning. No parting words, no last look, just a sudden absence. Why didn't you say goodbye? The question echoes in the empty spaces they used to fill, in the routines you keep performing out of habit, in the silence that replaced what you thought would last. You remember waiting for a call, a message, any sign that they were thinking of you. Maybe you told yourself it was a mistake that they'd reach out when things calmed down. Days passed, then weeks, and the realization grew heavier. This was the end, and you weren't even allowed to witness it. No closure, no final conversation, just a door quietly closed and locked on the other side. You start to second-guess everything. Was it something you said? Did you miss a signal? Overlook a warning? The lack of goodbye feels personal, almost like a judgment, that you didn't matter enough to warrant a proper ending. You imagine what you would have said, given the chance. Maybe you would have asked for a reason, or offered forgiveness, or simply said, "Thank you for the good moments." But sometimes people leave because they can't bear the weight of goodbye. It's easier to disappear than to face the pain in your eyes, the questions you might ask, the tears that might fall. For some, departure is about self-preservation. For others, it's about shame, fear, or the inability to handle confrontation. Some are convinced that silence is kinder, that drawing out the ending will only make things worse. You think about your own history, times you've slipped away without explanation, hoping the other person would fill in the blanks with something gentler than the truth. You start to see that not saying goodbye isn't always about cruelty. Sometimes it's about cowardice, but sometimes it's simply about not having the language for endings. Still, the absence of goodbye leaves its mark. You carry the unfinished story, the unspoken words, the lingering questions. It shapes the way you approach new relationships. Maybe you become more cautious, more insistent on clarity, less willing to let things trail off into ambiguity. With time, the sting softens. You begin to understand that not all stories get the closure they deserve. You learn to say your own goodbyes, even if only in your mind, to honor what was lost, and to free yourself from the weight of what was left unsaid. The question remains, but it no longer defines you. You keep moving, finding endings where you can,
And sometimes you even learn to let go without needing the last word.
What did you hide from me? It's an uneasy thought, one that tends to surface in quiet moments, years after trust has been broken or faded. What did you hide from me? The question lingers not because you want to uncover every secret, but because you sense, deep down, that there were parts of the story you were never allowed to see. You wonder how much of your relationship was lived in the open, and how much was kept behind a locked door out of your reach. You replay old conversations, searching for moments that now feel slightly off, pauses that lasted too long, explanations that felt too simple, sudden changes in mood that never made sense. At the time, you may have chosen to believe, to accept, to let small oddities pass without challenge. Trust sometimes requires you to look away, to avoid picking at threads that threaten the fabric of what you have. Maybe you thought you were protecting the relationship, or yourself, or them. But looking back, the feeling grows. You sense there were truths left unsaid, stories edited for your comfort, worries disguised as confidence, old hurts never confessed. Maybe it was something as simple as an emotion they didn't want to share, a moment of doubt, jealousy, or regret. Or maybe it was larger, a hidden dream, a private pain, a chapter from their past they never let you read. Sometimes people hide things out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear that honesty would do more harm than good. Sometimes they hide things because they believe they're protecting you, or because they're protecting themselves. Some secrets are about survival, about maintaining a fragile peace. Others are born of habit, a life spent guarding the softer, more wounded parts of the self. The uncertainty eats at you. You wonder if knowing everything would have changed anything, or if the secrets were simply part of who they were, separate, private, never meant to be shared. Maybe you would have loved them anyway, or maybe the truth would have pushed you further apart. The only thing you know for sure is that you were never given the choice. You reflect on your own silences, the things you hid, the feelings you buried, the parts of yourself you never showed. Maybe you both participated in this quiet deception, believing that closeness meant knowing everything, when in reality, it's rare to be known fully. Over time, the need to know every secret softens. You accept that everyone has hidden corners, stories that aren't meant to be shared, pains too old or too sharp to revisit. You let go of the fantasy that love means complete transparency. Instead, you try to build new relationships on deeper honesty, not total disclosure, but a willingness to be real, to admit when you're afraid, to let someone see you as you are. The question never fully disappears, but you learn to live with not knowing and to trust that what mattered most was what you did share. What was hidden wasn't always a betrayal. Sometimes it was just the shape of being human, and you were both doing the best you could. Do you think of me? It's a question that surfaces quietly, unexpected, and a little fragile, often when you least expect it. Maybe you're going about your day and something reminds you of them. A song, a scent, a familiar street. Do you think of me? You don't ask, but you wonder. Is there a moment in their day when your name passes through their mind? Even for a heartbeat, do they smile, or wince, or feel nothing at all? You remember the weight of their presence in your life, the way you once shared everything, from mundane details to secret hopes. The intimacy feels so vivid in your memory that it's hard to imagine you could simply vanish from theirs. But people are good at compartmentalizing, at placing the past on a high shelf and rarely dusting it off. You wonder if you are just a closed chapter, or if the story still echoes somewhere in their mind. Sometimes you hope the answer is yes. You want to believe that you mattered, that your absence created a real space, that something is missing without you. You want to know you left a mark, that you aren't so easily replaced or forgotten. Other times, you fear the answer is also yes, that thinking of you brings regret, resentment, or old pain. You play out scenarios in your mind. Do they mention you to friends, or is your name unspoken? Do they revisit old photos or messages, or have they deleted every trace? Are you a passing thought, a lesson learned, or just a ghost in the background of their new life? You think about the times you've thought of them, how the memories sneak up on you, how a simple moment can make the past feel close again. Sometimes it's bittersweet, sometimes it stings, sometimes it makes you smile unexpectedly. Maybe they feel the same, maybe not. It's possible they think of you only in crisis or nostalgia, or that you cross their mind with nothing attached. Maybe they do their best not to think of you at all, focusing on what's next, not what's gone. Or maybe, every so often, your memory returns unbidden, and they wonder for just a second how you are. Over time, the need to know lessens. You learn that being thought of isn't the only measure of your worth. You accept that your life will continue whether or not you linger in someone else's memory. Still, when the question rises, it's not really about them. It's about you missing the closeness you once had, wishing that the past could occasionally reach back and touch the present. You let the question hang in the air, gentle and unresolved. Sometimes, the only answer you get is the one you give yourself. Yes, I think of you. And for now, that's enough.
Were you ever sorry? There's a quiet tension that lingers after hurt, sometimes years after the words were spoken or left unsaid. Were you ever sorry, you wonder? Not because an apology would change the past, but because regret feels like proof that what happened mattered, that the pain was seen, not just dismissed. You remember the moment things broke, a lie, a betrayal, a trust violated, or maybe just a slow unraveling where neither of you showed up for the other. Sometimes they said sorry, but the words felt hollow, hurried, a box ticked on the way to moving on. Other times no apology came at all. You waited for it, maybe even asked for it, and got silence or justification instead. You look for signs that they carried some of the weight you did. Did they avoid you out of shame, or because they felt nothing at all? Did they try to fix things in small ways, gestures you only understood later? Or did they move on untouched, convinced the ending was your fault or simply inevitable? Regret is a hard thing to measure. Some people show it easily. For others, it's buried under pride or self-protection. Maybe they were sorry but didn't know how to say it, or feared an apology would open wounds they'd rather ignore. Maybe admitting fault would have changed too much, forced them to confront not just you, but themselves. You consider what it would mean to hear, "I'm sorry," and truly believe it. Would it bring relief or just stir up the old pain? Would it help you forgive, or would it reopen the story you've tried so hard to finish? Sometimes you realize an apology is as much for the giver as the receiver, a way to lay down the burden of guilt, even if the other person is long gone. You think about your own apologies, the ones you offered and the ones you withheld. You see how difficult it is to be vulnerable, to admit the harm you've caused, to face someone else's pain. You understand that not everyone can reach that place, even if they want to. In the end, you may never know if they were sorry. The world doesn't always give you the satisfaction of closure, but you learn to forgive, not for them, but for yourself. You release the hope that their regret will heal you, and you let the question soften, drift away. You keep going, changed by what happened, but no longer defined by it.
carrying your own capacity for regret and forgiveness as quietly as a secret. Whether or not they were ever sorry, you learned to be gentle with your own scars and to say the words you wished you'd heard, if only for your own peace.
What did you need from me? It's a puzzle you turn over and over, looking for a piece you might have missed, a simple answer that would explain why things fell apart or why love turned into distance. Maybe you tried to guess while things were still whole, paying close attention to moods, gestures, and silences. You might have believed that love was about anticipation, about meeting needs before they're voiced. Maybe you tried to be everything, a comfort, a distraction, a source of strength or escape. But most needs go unspoken. People learn to swallow them, disguise them, or send them out as signals that aren't always easy to read. You replay the moments when frustration seeped into conversation, when arguments felt circular and unresolved. Was it really about the dishes? Or was it about something deeper? A need for reassurance, for validation, for the feeling of being chosen every day? Sometimes their needs were contradictory. Space and closeness, adventure and security, change and stability. You tried to walk the line, to be flexible, but the boundaries were always shifting. You think about the times they seemed distant, unreachable, or dissatisfied. You wondered if it was your fault, if there was something wrong with you. You might have asked directly, "What's wrong?" and gotten a shrug, a vague reply, or silence. It's only with hindsight that you realize the conversation you were missing wasn't about problems, but about unmet needs. Some people can't or won't say what they need. Maybe they never learned how. Maybe they're afraid to seem weak or selfish or vulnerable. Sometimes people don't know what they need until it's gone. Maybe they needed to feel safe or admired or understood. Maybe they needed to see that you could say no, or that you would stand up for yourself. You begin to notice your own patterns, the ways you tried to guess, to please, to stretch yourself into a version that might fit. You realize you spent so much energy trying to meet needs you didn't understand that you lost track of your own. The fear of failing them becomes bigger than your own sense of self. When you finally ask, "What did you need from me?" you may never get a clear answer. Sometimes they don't know either. Sometimes what they needed was impossible for anyone to give. Healing for old wounds, answers to unspoken fears, or something only they could find within themselves. Over time, you make peace with not knowing. You accept that you did your best with what you had, and that needing is complicated, not a reflection of your worth or effort. You carry the lesson into new relationships, to ask more, to listen better, to speak your own needs even when it feels risky. You let go of the fantasy that you could have fixed everything and learn to accept the limits of love and the beauty that comes with honesty, even when it's imperfect.
Was it real for you? The question appears in the quietest moments, after the excitement and pain have faded, when memory blurs the sharpest edges. Was it real for you? It's a question about reality and perception, about whether the connection you felt was shared, or if you were simply playing a part in someone else's script. You remember the intensity of the beginning, the electricity of eye contact, the feeling of being seen, the promises whispered late at night. The gestures and words felt genuine, the laughter effortless, the comfort immediate. You want to believe those moments were real, not just to you, but to them. But after endings, doubt creeps in. The narrative unravels. You look for signs. Did they mean what they said, or were they simply afraid to be alone? Did they stay because they loved you, or because it was easier than leaving? Were their smiles and kindness an act,
or a reflection of something true. Sometimes you look for evidence, combing through old messages, replaying conversations, searching for cracks in the story. Did their eyes ever wander? Did their affection feel mechanical? Were the apologies genuine or simply the price of peace? You wonder if you missed warning signs, moments when they hesitated, when their attention faded, when their words were out of sync with their actions. You remember the moments when things felt off, when intimacy became routine, when connection felt forced, when you sensed their mind was somewhere else. Did they love you, or just the idea of you? Was it about you at all, or about what you represented? A way out, a distraction, a familiar routine? You may never get a clear answer. Some people never tell the whole truth even to themselves. For some, feelings change so subtly that even they can't say when the shift began. Maybe it was real at first, and then it wasn't. Maybe it was always half imagined, half needed. You start to see that reality and relationships is slippery. Two people can experience the same moments in different ways. What was sacred to you may have been ordinary to them. What felt inevitable to you may have been temporary from the beginning. Eventually, you let go of the need for certainty. You remember what was real to you and accept that this is enough. You carry the memories forward, learn from the disappointments, and refuse to let doubt define your past. You become gentler with yourself, less desperate for external validation, more willing to believe that your experience was real, even if it wasn't shared.
Did you ever understand me? Some questions are less about blame and more about longing, to be seen, to be known, to have your inner world recognized and held with care. Did you ever understand me? It's a quiet ache, the kind that surfaces after misunderstandings, arguments, or simply after years spent feeling slightly out of sync. You think back to the ways you tried to explain yourself, the stories you told, the confessions you made, the small clues you dropped in conversation, hoping to be picked up and cherished. Maybe you hoped they'd read between the lines, sense what you couldn't say directly. You wanted them to understand your fears, your dreams, your sense of humor, your need for space or closeness. There were moments when you felt hopeful, a look of recognition, a perfectly timed gesture, a piece of advice that hit home. Maybe they got it, you thought. Maybe they see me. But just as often you felt invisible, misunderstood, or quietly frustrated. Your words fell flat, your intentions misread. Small disagreements became symptoms of a deeper gulf. You started to shrink, to avoid subjects, to become smaller in your own life. Sometimes you ask the question indirectly, do you get what I mean? Or do you see where I'm coming from? But the answers are often superficial. Not everyone is capable of empathy, of stepping into another person's experience. Some are too caught up in their own struggles, too distracted, too afraid to really listen. You wonder if understanding was even possible. Maybe you're too complicated, too different, or maybe you never let them in as much as you thought. You reflect on the ways you protected yourself, the secrets you kept, the times you wore a mask just to keep the peace. As time goes by, you learn to seek understanding elsewhere. In friends who listen deeply, in therapists, in your own journaling and self-reflection. You realize that true understanding is rare and precious. It can't be forced, and it can't be faked. You start to understand yourself better too. The more you know about your own mind, the less desperate you become for others to get it. You still long for connection, for those rare moments when someone truly sees you, but you stop blaming yourself or them when it doesn't happen. The question never fully disappears, but it loses its sharpness. You keep trying, keep reaching, keep believing that understanding is possible. And sometimes, in new places, with new people, you find it. A flash of recognition, a shared laugh, a feeling of home. You hold on to those moments, proof that being understood, even briefly, is enough to keep going.
Did you ever understand me? There's a longing that doesn't disappear, even after the ending has settled, even after new stories begin. Did you ever understand me? It's not quite about blame, and not about wishing things had gone differently. It's about wanting to know if, somewhere in all those days and conversations, you were really seen for who you are, or if you just played a role in someone else's version of the story. You look back at the ways you tried to communicate your inner world. Maybe you shared your hopes, your private jokes, your softest fears. Maybe you tried to explain what made you withdraw, what made you open up, what you needed in the hard moments. Sometimes you felt a flicker of recognition in their eyes, a small pause, a question, a moment when it felt like you were speaking the same language. But so often there was a kind of distance, a confusion that couldn't be bridged. You remember the small misunderstandings that became arguments, the way your intentions were misread, the way even your apologies seemed to miss their mark. You felt yourself growing quieter, shrinking parts of yourself just to keep the peace. There were moments you wanted to say, "No, that's not what I meant," or "Please try to see it from my side," but the words got stuck or were met with impatience. Sometimes you wonder if you were even trying to be understood, or just hoping they'd magically know what you needed. Maybe you weren't as open as you thought. Maybe you were protecting yourself, or maybe you were just too different to ever truly meet in the middle. You think about the moments of deep connection, those rare flashes when it felt like they saw you, when you could talk for hours and not notice time passing. Maybe those moments were enough. Maybe they remembered details, supported your dreams, or tried to comfort you in the way you liked. But when things got hard, when you needed understanding most, it felt like you were on your own. Sometimes the thing you wanted most was just to hear, "I get it. I get you." You wonder if they think about it too. Maybe from their side, you were hard to reach, mysterious, or simply someone with needs they couldn't fulfill. Maybe understanding was never possible, or maybe you both stopped trying before you even realized it. In the end, you make peace with what you got. You find understanding elsewhere, in friends who listen, in moments of self-acceptance, in the gentle realization that you don't need to be understood by everyone to be real. The ache doesn't vanish, but it loses its urgency. You carry the question with you, a quiet hope for the next time. To be seen, to be understood, to have someone say, "I know you," and mean it. Why did you change? The question comes after everything else, after the confusion, the arguments, the slow distance that settled in between you. Why did you change? It's never about the obvious things, the ones you could name out loud. It's about that silent shift, the way someone who once felt familiar becomes unrecognizable, the way affection turns to withdrawal, or words turn sharp and cold. You remember when things were easy, when you both moved in sync, laughed at the same things, wanted the same future. You think about the habits and rituals you shared, the morning routines, the little jokes, the ways you could predict each other's moods. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. The answers got shorter. The eyes didn't meet yours in the same way. The warmth in the room faded. You wonder if you missed the warning signs. You ask yourself if it was something you did. Was it neglect? Was it pressure? Was it the daily grind of routine and responsibility? Maybe you grew in different directions, but you still don't know what triggered the change. Sometimes you imagine asking what happened and hearing a simple answer, something to help you accept the new reality. But most changes are slow, the result of 100 choices, 1,000 disappointments, or simply the erosion of what once felt permanent. You remember trying to fix it, being extra kind, planning surprises, asking what was wrong. Sometimes you were met with defensiveness or vague reassurances that nothing had changed, even when everything felt different. You felt yourself becoming anxious, suspicious, maybe even desperate. Nothing worked. You realize eventually that change is inevitable. People outgrow each other, dreams shift, circumstances force priorities to rearrange. Sometimes the change is about them, a new job, a new friend, an inner struggle they can't share. Sometimes it's about you, your own shifts, your own needs evolving, your own desire for something new. You wish for an answer, a story you can tell yourself so you can put the past to rest. But most of the time, all you get is the reality of change itself, unpredictable, uncontrollable, neither good nor bad in itself, just a fact of being alive. With time, you let go of the need to know exactly why. You begin to accept that change is not always a verdict or a punishment. You focus on your own growth, your own path, and trust that the changes you experience are leading you somewhere meaningful, even if it means leaving some people behind.
What would you say now? This question arrives with age, with distance, with the clarity that only comes after everything is over. What would you say now? It's the fantasy of the second chance, the letter you never sent, the conversation you play out in your mind when the room is quiet and the past feels close enough to touch. You imagine meeting them again years later, on a street, in a crowded cafe, in a place that was once yours together. You wonder what words would come. Would you apologize? Would you thank them? Would you ask questions or offer answers? The things you once needed to say have changed with time. Anger softens, regret sharpens, gratitude becomes more visible in the spaces left behind. Maybe you would say you're sorry for what you did or didn't do, for the ways you were blind to their pain or too caught up in your own. Maybe you'd say thank you for the lessons learnt, the kindnesses given, the moments that made you who you are. Maybe you'd say nothing at all, just share a look that says, "We survived." You realize, with time, that your version of the story has shifted. You see your own flaws more clearly. You understand their actions with more gentleness. The urgency to win, to be right, to justify your side of things fades. What matters is simply that you lived through it, that you felt deeply, that you risked caring. Sometimes the conversation is just for you, a chance to forgive yourself, to make peace with the fact that not all stories end with closure. Maybe what you'd say now is simpler, kinder, more honest. Maybe you'd finally ask for the truth, or let go of the need to know. You realize you might never get the chance, but you can say it in your heart, in a letter you never send, in a moment of quiet at the end of a long day. What would you say now? Maybe only this: I remember, I learnt, I wish you well. And then, finally, you move on.
Did I hurt you? There's a quiet fear that shadows every relationship, even after it ends. Did I hurt you? Sometimes it's clear,
spelled out in an argument, an accusation, or a sharp goodbye. But more often, it's left unspoken, just a suspicion that lingers, resurfacing when you remember certain words, silences, or the look in someone's eyes before they turned away. You replay the moments you regret. Something careless you said, a day when you didn't show up, a time you prioritized your own needs without seeing the cost. At the time, maybe you brushed it off, convinced yourself it wasn't a big deal. But with distance, your memories take on new weight. You start to see the patterns, the way they withdrew, the times they seemed less themselves around you, the invitations they stopped offering. Sometimes the pain you caused wasn't obvious or immediate. It was slow, the result of neglect or misunderstanding, of taking for granted the things you thought were safe. The question grows sharper when you realize how little you knew about their inner world. People rarely confess their hurts while they're happening, sometimes out of pride, sometimes out of fear of conflict, sometimes because they hope you'll notice without being told. Maybe they did try to show you, and you missed it. Maybe they hinted, became distant, or tried to protect you from the truth. By the time you understood, the damage was already done. You want to believe you did your best, that any pain you caused was accidental or minor. You hope that time has softened the memory for them, as it sometimes does for you. But you know there's no guarantee. Maybe their words are still echoing, your absence still felt, your mistakes still remembered as turning points. You wonder if they ever wished you'd just asked, "Did I hurt you?" Would they have told you if you'd been brave enough to listen? Or would they have stayed silent, not wanting to reopen wounds or make you feel guilty? Sometimes people let things go, not because they've healed, but because they've learned to live around the pain. You think about the times you were hurt and how difficult it was to say so. Maybe you still haven't told everyone who deserves to know. You realize that hurting someone isn't always a choice or a moment. Sometimes it's a consequence of being flawed, distracted, or just human. Over time, you learn to approach your relationships with more humility. You become gentler, more willing to apologize even for small things. You know you can't undo the past, but you can take responsibility for your part in it. Sometimes you reach out, offer a genuine apology, not expecting forgiveness, but hoping to give back a little of what was lost. You may never know the full truth. The question remains, sometimes answered, sometimes not. You carry it as a reminder to be present, to pay attention, to care enough to ask before it's too late. And you try, with each new connection, to be the kind of person who can hear the answer, whatever it is.
Were you pretending? Trust is a fragile thing. Even after years together, a tiny doubt can unravel the sense of safety you thought you had. Were you pretending? It's not always about big lies or betrayals. Sometimes it's the fear that someone you cared for wasn't as invested, as open, as real as you believed. You start to look back at certain moments, forced laughter, carefully chosen words, a look that didn't match the mood. You remember times when something felt off, but you explained it away. Maybe they were tired, distracted, just having a bad day. You told yourself not to read too much into it, but after things end, the question grows louder. Were they really there with you or just playing a role? Did they mean it when they said, "I love you," or were those just the words expected in that moment? You think about the routines you built together, the shared meals, the long talks, the rituals of affection. Did they enjoy those moments, or were they going through the motions? Sometimes people pretend to protect themselves or to avoid hurting you. Sometimes they pretend because they want what you have to be true, even if it isn't. Maybe they hoped to grow into their feelings, or simply didn't know how to be honest about what had faded. You wonder if you could have spotted the difference. Were the signs there all along? An evasive answer? A pattern of withholding?
A kind of distance that you felt but couldn't name? Or did they hide it so well that even they half believed it? You look at your own role too. Were you pretending at times, trying to live up to expectations, afraid to be vulnerable? Maybe you both wore masks, each waiting for the other to break the spell. It's easier sometimes to keep up appearances than to confront what isn't working. The question can gnaw at your sense of reality. If some part of the relationship was pretend, what does that mean for all the memories you treasure? Were you alone in your hope, your affection, your dreams for the future? You begin to accept that people pretend for many reasons, not always out of malice, but out of fear, habit, or simple confusion. Pretending is sometimes a way to hold on to comfort, to avoid the pain of change, to delay the inevitable. It doesn't erase the good moments, but it does complicate how you remember them. With time, you learn to value authenticity above comfort. You become braver about naming what's real, about asking hard questions before it's too late. You realize that you can't control whether someone else is pretending, but you can choose to show up honestly yourself. And in that choice, you find the kind of connection you truly want, even if it's more vulnerable than you imagined.
What did you wish I knew? This question is about the words left unspoken, the signals missed, the longing for someone to just understand without needing to be told. What did you wish I knew? It's the ache behind so many misunderstandings, disappointments, and moments when two people sat side by side but still felt miles apart. You remember the times you sensed something was wrong but didn't know what to ask. Maybe they withdrew, grew irritable, or seemed sad for reasons you couldn't see. You offered comfort or advice or just your presence, but it never seemed quite enough. Later, you realized there was something deeper, a truth or a pain they never put into words. Maybe they wanted you to know they were scared or lonely or overwhelmed. Maybe they wished you understood why certain things hurt more than you realized, or why they reacted the way they did. Perhaps they wanted you to recognize the effort it took to get out of bed some days, or how much it meant when you remembered the smallest details. You think about the times you wished someone would just know without you having to explain what you needed, what you feared, what you dreamed about. It's a kind of magic when it happens, when someone truly sees you. But more often, the gap between what you feel and what others perceive remains stubbornly wide. You wonder if you ever asked them directly, "What do you wish I understood about you?" Or did you both stay silent, hoping to be read like an open book? Maybe you were too distracted by your own needs, too confident in your assumptions, or just too afraid of hearing something you didn't want to know. The regret is not always about what was done, but about what was missed, the little truths that could have bridged the gap, the moments of empathy that might have changed the course of the story. Sometimes you realize the greatest kindness you can offer is simply to ask and then truly listen. You learn to be more attentive in future connections. You ask more questions, practice more patience, try to notice the subtle shifts in mood or expression. You realize that no one can read minds, but everyone wants to be seen. You do your best to make space for the other person's unspoken wishes. The question doesn't disappear, but it becomes a reminder, a call to pay closer attention, to listen for what isn't said. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find someone willing to share their hidden wishes, to trust you with the things they were once too afraid to say out loud. In those moments, you feel the distance close and realize that understanding is always possible, even if it takes a lifetime to learn how. Did you want to be found? Sometimes, distance isn't about geography. People drift, disappear, pull away, and you're left wondering, did you want to be found? It's a question that flickers in the mind during long silences or after someone has gone so far that you barely recognize the shape of their absence. Was it a call for help, a quiet hope that someone would chase after them, or a deliberate closing of doors, a plea not to be disturbed? You think back to the first signs. Maybe it started with missed calls, unanswered messages, subtle hints that something was wrong. Maybe they grew vague about plans, more private with their thoughts, more likely to cancel at the last minute. At first, you chalked it up to stress, busy schedules, a phase. But the pattern continued until one day you realized you were doing all the reaching and they were only ever responding, if at all. You wonder what would have happened if you'd tried harder, called more, shown up unannounced, demanded a conversation. Would they have welcomed your effort, or would they have seen it as an intrusion? Sometimes, the ones who want to be found leave breadcrumbs, small invitations, unfinished stories, a birthday message, an old inside joke sent out like a flare. Other times, the silence is intentional, a way of building a wall too high to climb. You think about their reasons. Maybe they were hurting and didn't know how to say so. Maybe shame or pride kept them quiet, afraid that being found would mean exposing wounds they'd rather hide. Perhaps they genuinely wanted solitude, needing space to become someone new without the weight of old expectations. Or maybe they hoped someone would notice their absence, not just fill the gap with busyness and distraction. You reflect on your own history, the times you disappeared, either out of fear, depression, or a need to start over. Did you secretly hope to be pulled back, to be missed? Or was the goal to go unnoticed, to heal in peace, to re-emerge on your own terms? It's easier to see both sides now, the longing to be found and the relief in being left alone. When you think of the person who drifted away, you're left with the ache of unfinished business. You want to know if you failed them, if there was more you could have done, or if your absence was exactly what they needed. The truth is, most of us are conflicted. We want to be found, but we're also afraid of what being found might require: honesty, vulnerability, change. You may never get to ask the question directly, or you might, and the answer will be as complicated as the silence that prompted it. All you can do is make peace with not knowing. Accept that sometimes your job is to wait, sometimes it's to reach out, and sometimes it's to respect the boundaries someone else has set. And maybe, just maybe, you become better at noticing the signals, the difference between someone quietly leaving and someone quietly hoping to be followed. You carry the question with you, a reminder that care sometimes means chasing and sometimes means letting go.
Why did you let go?
Some endings are sudden, a fight, a confession, a line crossed. Others are slow dissolutions, a drifting apart so gradual you barely notice until the distance is irreparable. You find yourself replaying the end, trying to answer, why did you let go? It's a question that rarely gets a clear reply because the reasons are almost never simple. You remember when holding on felt easy, shared routines, private jokes, a history built out of ordinary days. Then things started to change. Maybe there were more silences, fewer shared plans, the sense that you were living parallel lives under the same roof. You hoped it was temporary, that things would reset if you just tried harder. But slowly you felt the connection thinning, like a thread pulled tighter with each missed conversation, each unsaid word. You search for a cause. Was it a single argument? The accumulation of minor disappointments? A growing realization that your paths were diverging? Maybe it was about timing or the gradual shift in what you each wanted out of life. Perhaps they let go because they didn't see a future, or because holding on felt heavier than moving on. Sometimes letting go is an act of self-preservation, the courage to leave before bitterness takes root. You wonder if you could have changed the outcome, if you'd noticed the early warnings, had the hard conversations, shown more patience or vulnerability. But when someone lets go, it's rarely about a single moment. It's the result of many moments, most of them invisible in real time. Sometimes people let go not out of anger or disappointment, but out of exhaustion, tired of trying, tired of hoping, tired of pretending. There's also the chance that letting go was about growth. Sometimes two people simply outgrow what once fit perfectly. Needs change, dreams evolve, and the old version of us can't stretch to accommodate who you're both becoming. In these cases, letting go isn't failure, it's the hardest kind of honesty. You think about your own capacity to hold on and let go, the times you've left relationships, jobs, or old versions of yourself behind. Sometimes it was an act of bravery, sometimes regret, sometimes the only option left. You see now that letting go is as much a part of life as holding on, though the world often treats it as a tragedy. In the end, the question may never be answered fully. Why did you let go is too big for a single sentence. But you learn to respect the silence, to trust that people leave for reasons that make sense to them, even if they never make sense to you. You keep the lessons, mourn the loss, and remind yourself that moving forward means sometimes letting go too. What don't I remember? Memory is supposed to be the thread that ties your life together, a story you tell yourself to make sense of who you are. But as you get older, you realize how many pieces are missing. What don't I remember? It's a question that grows sharper with time, especially after someone else tells a story you've forgotten, or you find an old photo that feels like someone else's life. You start to wonder what has slipped through the cracks. Is it just the small things, the way a room smelled, the words that made you laugh, the quiet reassurances you took for granted? Or is it something bigger, a moment that could change your perspective, a kindness you never acknowledged, a hurt you never healed? Sometimes you have the sense that there are gaps you'll never fill, and it unsettles you. You look at childhood photos and try to summon memories. Some come rushing back, colored by nostalgia or regret. Others remain stubbornly blank. Family members remember stories you can't place, birthdays, arguments, inside jokes. You smile and nod, not wanting to admit that your own history has holes. You wonder if these gaps protect you, or if they're evidence of wounds too painful to revisit. Sometimes you forget as a defense, a way to keep moving forward without getting trapped in the past. Other times, memory fades simply because life is crowded, too many days stacked on top of each other, too many details for one mind to hold. You're left with fragments, a highlight reel curated by feeling rather than fact. You realize how much of your life depends on memory, the lessons you carry, the trust you place in others, the way you interpret what's happening now. You worry about what you've lost, what stories you can't pass on, what apologies you never made because you forgot the harm. You wonder if there are people out there who remember you differently, whose memories of you don't match your own. You learn to make peace with forgetting. You write things down, take more photos, ask more questions. You share memories with others, letting their versions fill in your blanks, accepting that no two people remember the same event in exactly the same way. Over time, you realize that not remembering everything doesn't mean your life wasn't meaningful. It just means you're human. You carry the question with humility. What don't I remember? It keeps you curious, keeps you open, keeps you searching for pieces of yourself in the stories other people tell. And sometimes, that's enough. Was it ever enough? This is the question that lingers quietly long after the end, after the last conversation, the final message, the realization that the story is over. Was it ever enough? Enough love, enough effort, enough presence to make the struggles and the heartbreak worthwhile? You look back, sifting through memories, trying to find an answer that explains both the good and the loss. You remember the times you gave everything you could, showed up, tried harder, forgave, offered second chances. You remember making sacrifices, bending your routines, learning new ways to listen and comfort. There were moments when it felt like enough, when you could see gratitude or affection in their eyes, when laughter came easily, when silence between you was comfortable, not strained. But for every moment of peace, there were others shadowed by doubt. The arguments that circled back without resolution. The days when nothing you said or did seemed to land the way you hoped. You wondered if your best efforts fell short, if you were loving in the wrong way, if the shape of your caring didn't fit the emptiness in them or in yourself. You noticed the patterns. The more you gave, the more it felt like a test. If only you could be more patient, more open, more forgiving, then maybe things would have worked out. Maybe you both chased the idea that there was always something missing, a deeper connection, a better understanding, a cleaner slate. Sometimes it wasn't about you at all. Sometimes it was the other person's own emptiness, wounds or fears making nothing feel like enough. You want to ask them, even now, with the safety of distance, did I ever reach you? Did my efforts, my love, my apology, my trying, was it ever enough to make you feel at home? Or did you always sense a gap between what you wanted and what we had? Maybe they felt the same. Maybe they also tried, also wondered if their best was enough for you. You start to see that enough is not a fixed point. It's a moving target, changing with time, circumstance, and the inner tides of hope and disappointment. What was enough yesterday may not be enough tomorrow. Sometimes, even when you do everything right, the story still ends. Not because you failed, but because the conditions for enough were never really there. You reflect on your own capacity to receive. Did you ever tell them what you needed, or were you hoping they'd guess? Did you recognize the small ways they tried, or only see the ways they fell short? Enough is about both giving and receiving, about grace for imperfections, about knowing when to stay and when to let go. Eventually, you find some peace. You realize that you did what you could with what you knew. You accept that not every relationship will feel complete, not every effort will be seen or reciprocated. You stop measuring your worth by what someone else was able to receive. The question, was it ever enough, softens. It becomes less an accusation, more a gentle curiosity, a marker of how much you cared, how much you tried, and a reminder that sometimes trying itself is enough. Did you lie to protect me? Some truths are hard to hold, harder still to share. In every close relationship, there are moments when honesty wavers, when a small lie feels kinder than the sharp edge of reality. Did you lie to protect me? The question sits between relief and suspicion, wondering if the gentler story you were told was meant to shield you or simply to avoid discomfort. You look back on moments of confusion, on explanations that felt too easy, or reassurances that didn't match your intuition. Maybe you sensed the truth beneath the surface, a look away, a hesitation, a detail that changed in the retelling. You wanted to believe, needed to believe, that the story you were given was the whole truth. But sometimes, in hindsight, the edges don't fit. You consider their motivation. Maybe they wanted to spare you pain, believing that ignorance would keep you safe. Maybe they lied to buy time, hoping the problem would resolve on its own, or the truth would lose its sting. Perhaps the lie was an act of love, a misguided attempt to shield you from a reality that would only hurt. You wonder how much protection is worth and at what cost. Sometimes a lie is a kindness, a buffer that allows you to heal or to avoid unnecessary worry. Other times, it's a breach of trust, a wedge that grows wider the longer it remains unspoken. Eventually, lies accumulate, and the world between you and them becomes foggy, full of guesses and half-truths. You reflect on your own choices too. How many times have you bent the truth, softened a blow, withheld a detail out of love or fear? Maybe you believed you were being merciful. Maybe you just didn't know how to tell the truth or feared losing what mattered most. If you could ask directly, "Did you lie to protect me?" what answer would you want? Would the truth now help or only hurt? Sometimes the intention behind the lie is as important as the fact itself. Were they trying to protect you or themselves? Did they think you couldn't handle it, or did they want to avoid the fallout? In time, you learn that love is sometimes complicated by the urge to shield, to soften, to keep things simple. You begin to value honesty, even when it stings, over comfort that can't last. You realize that real protection isn't about hiding the truth, but about facing it together. You may never know for sure what was hidden or why. The question remains, a quiet shadow in the story you share with others. But you move forward, choosing to build new trust on honesty, however imperfect, and you hope next time that love will choose courage over concealment. Do you feel alone? There's a difference between being alone and feeling alone, and the distinction is rarely visible from the outside. Do you feel alone? It's a question most people hesitate to ask, even of themselves. In the midst of company, conversation, or routine, loneliness can seep in, a quiet ache, a sense of being out of step with the world around you. You think about the times you sat across from someone you cared about and still felt a gap, a quiet distance that couldn't be bridged by words or touch. Maybe you were both trying, both showing up, but somehow your internal worlds never quite met. You remember parties, family gatherings, busy days at work, places where loneliness is not supposed to exist. Yet there it was, an invisible companion. You wonder if others sensed your isolation, or if they too were carrying their own private loneliness. You notice the ways people try to signal connection, small talk, shared memories, the comfort of routine. But sometimes even these gestures land on the surface, unable to reach whatever is missing underneath. You remember moments when someone asked, "Are you okay?" and you said yes, too tired or too proud to explain the hollow feeling inside. Maybe you feared that admitting your loneliness would make it real, or that it would be misunderstood as a criticism of those who care for you. You look for causes. Maybe it's a change, a loss, a move, a transition that left you unanchored. Maybe it's a chronic feeling, woven into your story since childhood, a sense of being different or hard to reach. Or maybe it's just a temporary season, a reaction to stress, uncertainty, or unmet needs. You think about the person you want to ask, "Do you feel alone?" Maybe they're always surrounded by people, always busy, always smiling. But you wonder about their quiet moments, the times when the noise fades and they're left with themselves. Would they admit to loneliness, or brush it aside, or not even recognize it for what it is? You realize that loneliness isn't always about the absence of others. Sometimes it's about the absence of being truly seen or understood. You learn to reach out, to risk asking deeper questions, to offer more than small talk. You seek connections where honesty can live, even if it means being vulnerable first. Over time, you make peace with your own aloneness. You come to see it as a part of being human, not a flaw to be fixed, but a signal to keep searching for meaning, for companionship, for your place in the world. The question, "Do you feel alone?" becomes less a fear, more an invitation to listen, to open up, and maybe to feel a little less alone together. Who are you now? Time changes people. You can lose touch, go years without a word, and then wonder, sometimes in the quiet of your own mind, sometimes after seeing a face in a crowd, who are you now? It's a question that carries equal parts curiosity and longing. When someone was once important to you, it's hard to accept that they have continued to grow and change in ways you can't see. You remember who they were, the way they laughed, their opinions, the small routines you shared. You recall the ambitions they spoke about, the fears they confessed, the flaws you learned to accept or endure. Maybe you watched each other grow for a while, then drifted apart, by choice, by accident, or simply because life pulled you in different directions. Sometimes you try to fill in the gaps with your imagination. Maybe they fulfilled their dreams or reinvented themselves entirely. Maybe their life looks nothing like you once pictured. You wonder about the scars they've collected, the lessons they've learned, the beliefs that have shifted. Would you even recognize them, or would they feel like a stranger wearing a familiar face? You also think about the versions of yourself that they carry, the old habits, the things you outgrew, the pain or hope you left in their memory. There's a strange dissonance in realizing someone remembers a you that no longer exists. You wonder if the same is true in reverse. Reconnection, when it happens, is often awkward at first. You compare your memories to their present reality. Sometimes you're surprised at how much they've changed, or how little. Other times the distance feels too wide to cross. You ask polite questions, share superficial updates, dance around the parts of your lives that no longer intersect. At times, the question is tinged with regret or nostalgia. Maybe you parted badly, or not at all, and you find yourself longing to know who they are now, not just out of curiosity, but as a way of making peace with the past. Did they find happiness? Are they at ease in their own skin? Are they still haunted by old struggles, or have they learned to let go? You reflect on your own growth too. The person you are now is shaped by 1,000 small decisions, by joy and pain, by losses and quiet victories. Would they understand you if they met you again today? Would you want them to? In the end, you accept that people change, and so do you. The versions of each other you once loved or hurt or laughed with are snapshots, not the whole film. Who are you now? The answer is always changing, sometimes clear, sometimes mysterious, always unfinished. You let the question linger, a gentle reminder that everyone you meet is a work in progress, and that there is beauty in the mystery of who we keep becoming. Would you do it again? Regret and reflection often lead to this simple, difficult question. Would you do it again? Looking back, it's easy to point out the mistakes, the red flags you missed, the moments when you might have chosen differently. But the truth is, at the time, you did what you believed was right, or what you needed to survive, to learn, to feel alive. You remember the decision points, falling in love, moving away, taking a risk, ending things, forgiving or walking away. Some choices brought joy, others pain. Some opened doors you never imagined, others closed chapters before you were ready. The consequences are sometimes still unfolding, long after you made your choice. It's tempting to say you wouldn't do it again, that with all you know now, you would spare yourself the heartache, avoid the disappointment, choose a smoother path. But when you look closer, you see how those very struggles shaped you. They forced you to grow, to face truths about yourself, to become more compassionate or resilient or wise. Would you trade that growth for comfort? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You consider the relationships you entered or ended, the words you said or left unsaid. Would you risk loving someone who couldn't stay? Would you try to save something that was always bound to end? Would you trust, knowing now how trust can be broken? You also remember the good moments, joy, laughter, intimacy, adventure. Even when things ended badly, even when pain lingered, you can't deny the reality of what was once beautiful. Would you give up those memories just to avoid the ache that followed? You wonder how the other person would answer. Would they do it again, knowing how things ended? Did the time you shared mean as much to them, or was it just a detour on their journey? Sometimes you want to ask, sometimes you're afraid to know. In the end, the answer is rarely simple. Life is a tangle of choices and consequences, and doing it again is always a hypothetical. The only certainty is that you are here, now, shaped by what you dared to risk, what you learned to endure. You start to see that regret and gratitude can coexist, and that being willing to do it again, despite the risk, despite the cost, is a testament to hope, to the belief that some things are worth it, even if they don't last. You move forward, accepting that every choice leaves its mark. You learn, you heal, and if given the chance, maybe you would do it all over again, not because it was perfect, but because it was real.
What's your biggest regret? Everyone has regrets. Some are sharp and specific, others diffuse and hard to name. A word you wish you'd spoken, a chance you wish you'd taken, a love you let slip away. What's your biggest regret? It's a question that's both intimate and universal, one that can bring people closer or shut them down in silence. You think about your own regrets, the moments you replay late at night, the roads not taken, the apologies you never gave. Some regrets are about actions, things you did that you wish you could undo. Others are about inaction, the times you froze out of fear or pride or uncertainty, letting life move on without you. The ache of what could have been is a shadow that never quite disappears. You remember the people you hurt, intentionally or by accident, the relationships you neglected or sabotaged, the dreams you let go of too soon. Sometimes regret comes not from one decision, but from a slow accumulation of small choices, habitual avoidance, routine dishonesty, a failure to reach out. You wonder about the regrets of others, especially those who were once close to you. You want to know if they regret letting you go, or holding on too long, or missing the truth that was right in front of them. Maybe you hope their regret matches yours, that it's a kind of proof that what you shared mattered. But regret is rarely symmetrical. Everyone's biggest regret is shaped by private wounds, secret hopes, and the stories we tell ourselves about what should have happened. Some people carry their regrets quietly, using them as fuel to live differently. Others are haunted, stuck in the past, unable to forgive themselves or ask for forgiveness. You learn, over time, that regret is part of being alive. It's evidence that you cared, that you tried, that you risked feeling deeply. The challenge is not to let regret become a prison, but to allow it to be a teacher. You can't rewrite the past, but you can use its lessons to shape the future. Sometimes the greatest gift is to share your regrets honestly, with yourself, with others. You discover that vulnerability makes room for healing, and that even the deepest regrets can lose their power when spoken aloud. You start to understand that while you can't avoid regret, you can learn to live with it, to grow from it, and in time, to forgive yourself for being imperfectly human.
Were you ever happy? It's a question that surfaces unexpectedly, sometimes years after the relationship or chapter has ended. Were you ever happy? Not just content, not just settled or going along with things, but genuinely, deeply happy. You look back at the photos, the vacations, the ordinary mornings, and wonder if what you remember as happiness was shared, or if it was only your own private illusion. You recall laughter, inside jokes, moments of easy comfort. You remember their smile, the way they used to reach for your hand in public, the way they looked at you when they thought you weren't watching. But memory can be selective, colored by longing or regret. It's hard to know what was real and what was hope dressed up as certainty. You think about the days when things seemed off, when their silence felt heavier than words, when small frustrations piled up until even the good moments were shadowed by tension. Were those signs that happiness was already fading, or just the normal ups and downs of living close to someone else? Sometimes you remember trying to ask, "Are you happy?" and getting a practiced answer, a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes, or a shrug that left you guessing. You wonder if they were happy in ways you never saw, private joys, secret satisfactions that had nothing to do with you. Maybe their happiness depended on factors outside your relationship, career, friendships, their own evolving sense of self. Or maybe they were never fully present, always waiting for something more or different, always slightly elsewhere in their mind. Sometimes, after an ending, the stories shift. The same memories you treasured become sources of pain or frustration for the other person. You might hear that they felt lonely or misunderstood or stuck. It's hard to reconcile these truths with the happiness you thought you shared. You want to go back and ask, with genuine curiosity, "Were you ever truly happy with me, or was I only seeing what I wanted to see?" You reflect on your own happiness too, the things you kept silent about, the compromises you made, the moments you pretended, even to yourself, that everything was fine. Sometimes being happy together is harder than either person admits. Over time, the question loses its sharpness. You accept that happiness isn't a constant state, that it comes and goes, shaped by the ebb and flow of life, by the limitations of both people. You recognize the moments of joy for what they were, real, even if fleeting, even if not always shared in equal measure. In the end, you make peace with not knowing for sure. You let the question linger as a gentle reminder to ask more, to listen better, to be honest, first with yourself, then with those you love. And you hope, for both your sake and theirs, that happiness was present, at least for a while, and that new forms of it are possible wherever your paths have led. Who did you become without me? This is the question that arises after the dust has settled and the pain has softened. A kind of quiet curiosity mixed with vulnerability. Who did you become without me? It's the realization that when you let someone go, or when they leave you, both of you continue to grow and change, but separately, on different trajectories. You were once a daily presence in their life, shaping their routines, their moods, even their sense of identity. Now you're just a chapter in their past. You try to imagine their new life. Did they pursue old dreams that your relationship made impossible? Or did they discover ambitions they never knew they had? Did they finally pick up a new hobby, move cities, change their career, or make new friends you'll never meet? You wonder if they became more themselves, less guarded, more confident, maybe even happier, or if they struggled with loneliness, regret, or uncertainty. It's tempting to assume that your absence was a kind of loss for them, but you also know that sometimes people flourish once they're on their own. Maybe you were a source of comfort, but also a limitation. Maybe you were both holding each other back, however gently, from growth neither of you could have found together. You wonder how you exist in their memory. Are you the one who hurt them, the one who taught them, the one who made them laugh? Did the best parts of your relationship shape who they are now, or do they remember only the hard parts? Did they keep some of your habits, your sayings, your favorite songs? Or did they wipe the slate clean, determined to reinvent themselves completely? You reflect on your own changes too. Who did you become without them? Are you kinder, more patient, more aware of your own needs? Did the loss teach you resilience, or did it leave you with scars you're still learning to heal? Maybe their absence gave you the space to try new things, or forced you to confront truths about yourself that you'd long ignored. There is no way to know for sure who the other person has become. You may catch glimpses through mutual friends, social media, or the rare encounter on the street. Sometimes you'll see signs of happiness, transformation, or simply peace. Other times, the answer will be hidden, a private journey that belongs only to them. In the end, the question is less about comparison and more about acceptance. Both of you have changed in ways large and small because of and despite each other. Who did you become without me? The answer is always evolving, and perhaps it's enough to know that growth is possible for everyone, even if the path is no longer shared.
Did you need closure?
Endings are rarely neat. Even after the final conversation, the last message, the formal goodbye, there's often something unfinished, a question unasked, a truth unsaid, a gesture never made. Did you need closure? It's a question you rarely get to ask directly, yet it shadows both people, shaping how they move forward. You remember the uncertainty that lingered after the relationship or chapter ended. Was it really over or just paused? Did they wait for you to reach out, to offer an explanation, to tie up the loose threads? Or were they satisfied with how things ended, content to let the past be the past, no matter how messy or abrupt? You think about your own need for closure. Did you rehearse conversations in your mind, wishing for the right words to wrap things up? Did you wait for an apology, a confession, or just a simple acknowledgement of what you meant to each other? Maybe you wanted a clear reason, a story you could tell yourself about why it ended, so you could stop blaming yourself or searching for answers in the dark. Closure can be a gift, but it can also be elusive. Sometimes people walk away without a word, unable or unwilling to face the pain of an ending. Sometimes closure comes in the form of silence, a mutual understanding that nothing more can be said. Other times, the search for closure becomes a cycle, keeping you stuck in the past, hoping for resolution that never comes. You wonder if they needed closure too. Maybe they waited for you to reach out, or maybe they closed the door themselves, certain that anything more would just reopen wounds. You realize that closure is rarely symmetrical. One person's peace can be another's lingering ache. Over time, you learn that closure is not always about a conversation, an apology, or a final meeting. Sometimes it's something you create for yourself, a quiet acceptance that the story is finished, even if you never got all your questions answered. You begin to find closure in understanding your own feelings, in forgiving both of you for being human, in letting go of the need for everything to make sense. The question remains, did you need closure? Maybe, maybe not, but you find your own way to move on, and that, in the end, is closure enough. Are you still waiting? Waiting is a strange kind of faith, a quiet persistence, a hope that lingers after the obvious reason is gone. When you care about someone, or about something unfinished, waiting can become an invisible thread woven through your days, quietly tugging at your attention, your choices, your emotions. Are you still waiting? Isn't always a question you can ask aloud, but it's one that echoes between people who once shared a world and then parted, either suddenly or in slow degrees. You think about the different kinds of waiting you've known. Sometimes it's deliberate, a promise made, a reunion planned, a date circled on the calendar. More often, it's the subtler kind, waiting for a message that never comes, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for the right words to close a conversation or open a door. You wait for someone to change their mind, to apologize, to reach out. You wait for clarity, for peace, for some sign that you haven't been forgotten. You remember the ache of waiting in relationships, the endless rehearsals in your mind of what you'd say if they came back, the rituals that kept hope alive, a cup of coffee at the same time each day, a glance at your phone before sleep. You remember pretending not to wait, distracting yourself with work, friends, or self-improvement, all the while checking the periphery of your life for their shadow. Sometimes you wonder if they're waiting too. Did they let you go and immediately move on? Or do they sometimes look up and expect to see you walk through the door? Are they waiting for you to make the first move, to admit fault, to show you still care? Or have they set down the weight of waiting, finding new routines, new affections, new purposes? Waiting, you realize, can become its own comfort, a reason not to move forward, an excuse to keep your life in suspension. There's safety in hoping for what's familiar, even if it's just a memory. It allows you to postpone the grief, to keep the story unfinished, to pretend that anything is possible. But waiting also costs. It shapes the way you invest in other people, the opportunities you pass by, the way you talk to yourself. You might turn down chances for new love, new adventures, or new growth, all because some part of you is still standing at the edge of an old hope. Sometimes you convince yourself you're not really waiting, but your choices say otherwise. You think about why we wait. Maybe you're waiting for a specific person, a lover, a parent, a friend, to come back, to explain, to make things right. Maybe you're waiting for yourself, for the courage to move on, for the healing that will finally make it unnecessary to look back. Sometimes the thing you're waiting for isn't even clear anymore. It's just a vague sense of unfinished business, a feeling that the story isn't quite over. If you could ask them directly, "Are you still waiting?" what would you want the answer to be? Sometimes you want to hear that you're not alone in this ache, that the connection still matters, that it wasn't all one-sided. Other times you hope they've moved on, that they've found peace, because that means maybe you can too. With time, you start to see that waiting is rarely permanent. Even the deepest hope eventually yields to reality, to new responsibilities, to other people's lives moving on with or without you. You begin to notice that you're waiting less often, that you can go whole days or weeks without thinking about what might have been. When the urge resurfaces, you greet it with gentleness, an old friend who used to keep you company, now fading into the background of a changing life. Sometimes the act of asking the question is itself the beginning of letting go. "Are you still waiting?" becomes less an inquiry, a more quiet permission, to mourn what's lost, to remember fondly, and then to turn toward whatever is next. You start to wait for new things, a sunrise, a letter, a feeling of contentment you once thought was impossible. You realize that the future deserves your presence, not just your longing for what didn't happen. You may never know if they are still waiting, or if they ever did. The answer is not always necessary. What matters is that you honor your own waiting, your own hope, and, when you're ready, your own freedom. Life keeps moving, and somewhere along the way, you realize that the wait is over. Not because the story resolved the way you hoped, but because you have changed, and so has your need for what you left behind.
Do you wish you'd stayed? Regret is a complicated shadow, weaving through memory with both accusation and longing. Do you wish you'd stayed? Is a question most people never ask directly, but it sits quietly in the mind, especially after goodbyes that felt too abrupt, after endings that left more questions than answers. Sometimes you ask it of others, sometimes of yourself. The answer is rarely simple, because leaving and staying are both choices loaded with risk, with hope, with fear.
You remember the moment of decision, whether it was a dramatic exit or a quiet drifting, the day you both realized something had changed. Maybe you argued, maybe you cried. Maybe the ending was so gentle you didn't notice it was happening until it was already over. In the aftermath, you replay the scene, wondering what would have happened if one of you had paused, taken a breath, and decided to stay a little longer. Did they wish they'd stayed? Did you? It's easy to look back and see the potential, the unfinished business, the possibilities that were never explored. You remember the best parts, the laughter, the comfort, the shared ambitions, and wonder if more time would have brought resolution, healing, or just more pain. Was the ending a mistake, or was it the only way forward? Sometimes people leave because they have to, because the relationship has become toxic, or because staying would have meant shrinking, pretending, or betraying themselves. Other times, leaving is about fear. Fear of being trapped, fear of being disappointed, fear of settling for less than what you truly want. It's easy to condemn the person who leaves, to cast them as the villain, but the truth is that everyone has their own battles, their own reasons for needing to go. You wonder if they think of you, if there are nights when the silence is louder than comfort, when they remember your presence and feel the ache of absence. Maybe they imagine what life would be like if they'd chosen to stay, how different their days might feel, what joys and challenges you might have faced together. Or maybe they are certain that leaving was right, even necessary, and regret doesn't cross their mind. You reflect on your own choices. Do you wish you'd stayed? Sometimes the answer shifts with time. What felt unbearable in the moment might seem manageable now, while what seemed insignificant then now appears crucial. Memory is colored by nostalgia, by loneliness, by the desire to find meaning in what was lost. You think about the ways you've grown since leaving and whether that growth would have been possible if you'd remained. Sometimes people do wish they'd stayed, but not because the relationship was perfect. They wish for a chance to fix what was broken, to have another try at understanding, at forgiving, at building something better. Other times, the wish to have stayed is simply a wish to avoid pain, to have postponed grief a little longer, to stay in the comfort of the known rather than risk the uncertainty of starting over. Regret, though, is rarely productive on its own. It can teach you to value what matters, to listen more closely next time, to fight harder, or to let go with more grace. It can remind you that leaving and staying are both acts of courage, and that no one makes these decisions lightly. If you could ask, "Do you wish you'd stayed?" and hear an honest answer, maybe it would bring closure. Maybe it would complicate things further. Maybe in the end, it doesn't matter as much as you thought, because the past cannot be changed, only understood, forgiven, and learned from. Over time, you begin to accept the choices made by others and by yourself. You let the question serve not as a source of pain, but as a reminder to be present, to honor your own boundaries, to seek connection where it's possible, and to let go when it isn't. Whether you stayed or left, whether you regret or feel relief, the most important thing is what you do with your experience, how you carry it into the rest of your life. And so you live with the question, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply. Sometimes you realize it's enough just to have cared deeply enough.
Did you hope for more? Hope is the engine of every beginning, the silent partner in every plan, the subtle thread that runs beneath all relationships, whether spoken or secret. Did you hope for more is a question that looks backward with both tenderness and grief. It is the acknowledgement that things ended or never began, with an ache of incompletion. You recall the early days, how every message, every look, every late-night conversation seemed to promise a future. There was the excitement of possibility, the sense that the story could unfold in 100 different ways, all brighter than your present reality.
You made plans, even if only in your mind. You imagined trips, holidays, quiet mornings together, milestones you'd celebrate. Hope was woven into every interaction, even if you never named it out loud. You wonder about their hope too. Did they imagine a different ending? Did they see the same possibilities, the same path forward? Or were they cautious, protecting themselves, hoping only for the moment, never daring to believe in anything lasting? Sometimes you saw hope in their eyes, a softness, a dream, a pause before a question. Other times you sensed a wall, a reluctance to dream beyond what was already real. As the relationship moved forward, or stalled, you began to notice changes. Maybe hope faded slowly, undermined by disappointment or distance. Maybe it was cut short by a single argument, a broken promise, a reality that couldn't be ignored. You ask yourself if you held on too long, mistaking habit or fear for hope, refusing to see that the future you wanted was never theirs. Did you hope for more isn't just about romance. It's about friendship, family, even work. The longing for deeper connection, for mutual recognition, for the chance to build something that endures. You think about the moments when you almost voiced your dreams, but held back, afraid of scaring them away or exposing your own vulnerability. Maybe they did the same, each of you waiting for the other to go first. Disappointment is the shadow of hope. When things end, you're left with the ghost of what might have been, and you wonder if you were alone in your hoping. Was your vision shared, or were you always walking different roads, even as you held hands? Sometimes you get clues after the fact, a comment, a message, a confession that arrives years too late. I thought we'd make it, or I always imagined us growing old together. Sometimes you never find out, and the not knowing becomes a quiet ache you learn to live with. You start to recognize the risk in hope, the courage it takes to want more, to believe in more, to say, I want this to last. It's easier sometimes to expect little, to prepare for endings, to keep hope small and manageable. But real connection requires hope, and the pain of disappointment is the price we pay for dreaming together. With time, you see that hope isn't wasted, even if it goes unfulfilled. Hoping for more teaches you what you value, what you're willing to risk, what you most want to give and receive. It sharpens your sense of what's possible, and it leaves you softer, not harder, if you let it. You may never know exactly what they hoped for, or if your hopes matched, but you carry the question as a reminder that hope is a gift, one you offered honestly, even if the story didn't end the way you wanted. You let it shape the way you show up in the world, willing to hope again, willing to risk again, knowing that more is sometimes possible, even after loss. And maybe the next time you hope for more, you'll find someone willing to hope with you.
What do you wish I'd said? There are conversations that never happen, the ones you replay in the dark after the silence has settled, long after the opportunity has passed. What do you wish I'd said is one of those questions that haunts the spaces between people, the aftertaste of every unfinished story. You can spend years searching for the words that might have changed the ending, not because you want to rewrite the past, but because you want to understand it, to close the gap between what was said and what was needed. You imagine the scene, a moment tense with vulnerability, two people standing at the edge of honesty, waiting for a sign, a gesture, a phrase that could tip the balance. Maybe you said too much. Maybe you said nothing. Maybe the words came out wrong, defensive or sharp or clumsy when you meant them to be kind. The question lingers. If you could have seen beneath the surface, if you could have guessed what the other person longed to hear, would everything have unfolded differently? Regret grows in those gaps. You replay the last conversation, the argument that turned cold, the goodbye that was rushed or never came at all.
What do you wish I'd said becomes less about apology and more about connection, a yearning to know the inner world of someone you once loved or tried to love, a hope that there was a secret script you could have learned if you'd only listened harder. Sometimes what the other person wished you'd said is painfully simple. I'm sorry, I understand, I forgive you. Other times it's something more complicated, an admission of fear, a confession of need, a reassurance that even in disappointment, love wasn't lost. Maybe they wanted you to fight for them, or to let them go with more grace. Maybe they wanted you to say nothing at all, just to listen, to sit with their pain, to give them the silence they needed to make their own sense of things. You look back and wonder if there were moments when they waited for you to break the pattern, to be braver than you felt. Did they wish you'd asked the hard questions, admitted your own confusion or sorrow, told the truth you both sensed but couldn't name? Or were they hoping for something gentler, a small kindness, a memory shared, a moment of laughter to remind you both of better days? You think about your own longings, the things you wished they'd said to you. How many times did you want to hear, I see you, or I know this is hard, or simply, you matter? How many arguments could have been softened by one honest word, one moment of humility? The ache of what's unsaid can become larger than the conflict itself, a shadow that follows you into future relationships. There's a particular pain in realizing that what was needed wasn't impossible. It was just overlooked in the fog of ego, fear, pride. Sometimes you held back out of self-protection, convinced that vulnerability would make you small. Sometimes you assumed the other person already knew how you felt, or that they would ask if they needed more. But most of us are waiting, quietly, for permission to say the things that matter, and we rarely get it. You begin to realize that love is as much about listening as it is about speaking. It's about learning to read the pauses, the hesitation, the way someone turns away when the conversation gets too close to the truth. You remember the times you could have asked, "What do you need from me right now?" Or, "Is there something I'm missing?" Instead, you filled the silence with explanations, with justifications, with the stories you told yourself to make the pain easier to carry. In friendships too, there are things left unsaid, a thank you, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the role someone played in shaping your life. You wonder how many connections have withered, not from malice, but from the simple failure to name the love or gratitude that was there all along. What do you wish I'd said becomes a question for everyone you've ever cared for, even the ones who slipped quietly away. With time, you come to accept that not every silence is yours to fill. People carry their own reasons for not asking, for not telling, for not opening the door to a harder conversation. You learn to make peace with your limitations, to forgive yourself for being imperfect, for missing the moment, for failing to say the thing that would have changed everything. But you also learn to be braver. You try to ask more directly, in new relationships, with friends and family, with people you want to know more deeply. Is there something you wish I'd said? Is there something you need to hear? Sometimes the answer is simple, and you're able to offer it. Sometimes it's complicated, and you're left sitting with the discomfort of not being able to fix what's been broken. Either way, the act of asking itself becomes a kind of healing, a way of showing that you're willing to learn, willing to try again, willing to close the gap between what's true and what's spoken. In the end, you realize that the most important words are often the ones that come late, after the dust has settled, after the wound has scarred, after the story is over. I wish I'd told you how much you meant to me. I wish I'd listened better. I wish I'd said goodbye. There is still time sometimes to say these things, even if only to yourself, even if only as a way of honoring the people who shaped you. What do you wish I'd said lingers not as a rebuke, but an invitation to be more present, more honest, more attentive to the heartbeats of those you love, to offer the words that matter, even when they feel impossible, to let your silences become gentler, more deliberate, more loving, and to forgive yourself always for the words you didn't know you needed. Do you believe in second chances? The idea of a second chance is stitched deep into the human heart. A hope that what is broken can be mended, that mistakes don't have to be final, that the story doesn't have to end in regret. Do you believe in second chances is more than a question. It's a measure of faith, an act of courage, sometimes even a quiet rebellion against the logic of loss. You think of all the places this question appears: in romance, in friendship, in the relationship between parents and children, even in the way you treat yourself. To believe in second chances is to believe in change, in the possibility that pain can teach, that people can grow, that forgiveness is more powerful than the memory of failure. For some, the answer comes easily. Yes, they say, everyone deserves another chance. They've seen redemption, lived it, maybe even offered it to others. They point to relationships that survived betrayal, to careers rebuilt from ruin, to lives changed by a simple decision to try again. Their stories are full of hope. The friend who returned after years of silence, the partner who learned to love better, the parent who finally apologized. But for others, second chances are more complicated. Yes, people can change, but not always. Some wounds heal, some only close over with scars. To offer a second chance can feel like risking more pain, inviting disappointment, opening old wounds that never truly healed. The fear is real, of being hurt again, of repeating old patterns, of discovering that the past was not a fluke but a preview of the future. You think about the second chances you've given, the times you forgave a friend, let someone back into your life, started over after a failure. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes you discovered that hope alone isn't enough to build something new. The old problems resurfaced, the old pain returned, and you wondered if you'd been naive to try. But other times, things did change. People surprised you, and yourself most of all. A broken relationship became stronger for having weathered the storm. A lost opportunity returned in an unexpected form. You also think about the second chances you've asked for, the apologies you offered, the promises you made to be better, the longing to repair what you broke. Sometimes you were given the gift of another try. Sometimes you were met with silence or refusal. Both experiences taught you something about humility, about the limits of control, about the grace required to let go. Second chances aren't just about other people, they're about you. Do you give yourself permission to change, to start over, to be more than your worst mistake? Many people carry guilt for years, convinced they are unworthy of forgiveness, that the only story they're allowed is the one already written. But to believe in second chances is to believe in your own capacity for renewal, to let yourself move beyond shame, to take the risk of growth, to begin again. There's wisdom in caution, in setting boundaries, in learning from experience. Not every story deserves a sequel. Sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away, to accept that not all wounds should be reopened, that some endings are necessary. But to never believe in second chances is to close the door on hope, on the messy, surprising, redemptive work of being human. You look at the world and see how much is built on the possibility of change. Nature itself is a series of second chances, seasons turning, forests regrowing after fire, rivers finding new paths. Children forgive easily, friendships mend, even enemies become allies when circumstances shift. The capacity to start over is what keeps the world moving, keeps love possible, keeps life surprising. To believe in second chances is to accept risk, not just the risk of being hurt again, but the risk of hope itself. It means accepting that disappointment is part of the bargain, but so is joy, transformation, and unexpected connection. It means believing that you and those around you are not finished, not fixed in your failures, not defined by one chapter. So,
Do you believe in second chances? Maybe you do, and maybe you're still learning how. Maybe your answer depends on the day, on the wound, on the memory of pain, and the possibility of something better. But deep down, most of us hope for another try. Not because we're naive, but because we know what it's like to fall short, to long for forgiveness, to hunger for a story that isn't over. You realize over time that the real question is not just about second chances, but about the willingness to see others and yourself as works in progress. To leave room for change, for apology, for a love or a life remade. You offer second chances not because you are certain, but because you are hopeful. And in that hope, you find the courage to begin again.